Council's Scrutiny Committee on Wednesday, 21st of January. I am Councillor Toby Lawrence, the Vice Chair of this committee, and will be chairing the meeting tonight. The meeting is being web streamed to the public through the Council's YouTube channel. During the meeting, when asked to speak, please use the push to talk button on the microphone in front of you. This will allow the camera to pan in your general direction and everyone to hear you. Before we begin the formal committee, I am obliged to read out the following fire notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, then please could I ask that you make your way out of the building, down the main staircase and out of the main doors of the Town Hall and congregate to the entrance to Covent Park. An officer of the Council will give instructions on when it is safe to return to the building. Okay, so apologies for absence. There are 3 apologies this evening. We have received apologies from Councillor Timms, Hassel and New. Councillors Garcia, Picker and Mackenzie are present as substitutes. Declaration of interests. Can I remind members that when they declare interest, they must also declare the general nature of the interest? Are there any declarations under non-pecuniary interests as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for councillors, which includes non-registrable interests? Councillor Picker.
Thank you, Chair. So I declare a non-registrable interest as I am a councillor whose term of office expires in May 2026. I have taken advice from the monitoring officer and I am satisfied that I can continue to participate in the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. I declare a non-registrable interest as I am a councillor whose term of office expires in May 26. I have taken advice from the monitoring officer and can continue to participate in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Yeah, I'm not up for election in May, but I am up for election in 2027, which may be pertinent to comments made later in the meeting. So I declare that now.
Any other councillors?
I am up for election next May.
Okay. Councillor Freeman.
I have a non-pecuniary interest. I'm a member of the Patient Participation Group at Revel Surgery, which is referenced in one of the papers, and I work as a volunteer at that surgery.
So this is against item 2 of the agenda?
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other from the committee? Okay. Sorry. Yes.
Sorry, just to advise that I've just noticed a member of the public using their phone. Not sure whether it's to take camera or video, and I just wonder if that's permitted in the meeting. Just so you can let everybody know, that's all.
Sorry, yeah. Could I just remind everybody to have their telephones on silent? I would then refer to you about people live streaming off their own phones. Is there any issue?
It's not unlawful. We are web streaming anyway. So.
We are. I think we are web streaming anyway, so no issue. Okay.
So, excuse me, Chair. Can I declare?
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
So, as per the wording that was repeated before, as per Cabinet, I'd like to declare a non-registrable interest due to the fact that I'm a member of Cabinet and leader of the Council, due to stand for re-election in May 26. I have taken advice from the Council's monitoring officer regarding the Constitution, and my decision is that I'm able to continue in the meeting.
Could we just, if anybody has got a telephone in front of them, could they not wave it around and use it? It would maybe a distraction during the meeting. Finally, sorry, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. To declare a non-registrable interest due to the fact that I'm a member of Cabinet and due to stand for re-election in May 2027. I've taken advice from the Council Monitoring Officer regarding the Constitution, and my decision is that I am able to continue in the meeting. Thank you.
Have I missed anybody else? I think. Okay. I think I'm now going to declare my own. I declare a non-registrable interest as I am a councillor whose term of office expires in May 2026. I have taken advice from the monitoring officer and am content that I can continue with this meeting. Could I also ask if any declarations or any pecuniary interest is defined by the councillor's code of conduct for councillors? Are there any declarations under notice under Section 106 Local Government Finance Act 1992, non-payment of community charge or council tax? We move to item 3 of the agenda, resorting for the 2026 elections and local government reorganisation. I will invite speakers to introduce themselves and state who they represent before making their statement. There are some rules for public speaking, which I need to read out. Speakers will have 5 minutes to make their statement. I will be taking speakers one after the other, and then to the end of the last speaker, I will invite any member of Scrutiny to put questions to the speaker. After the final question, there is no more involvement of the public speakers. Alarm will sound when their time has expired. The statement should then be brought to a halt. No extra time will be allowed. No visual aids or handouts may be used. No questions to officers or councils will be allowed. No members of the public are allowed to take part in the debate. As outlined in the Council's constitution, speakers will not permit speeches which are about a matter which Rugby Borough Council does not have a responsibility or which affects the borough, your own personal circumstance or to a specific housing, planning, licensing or grant application, is defamatory, frivolous or offensive, is substantially the same as a question statement that has been put at a meeting of the council in the past 6 months, has already been answered, heard, i.e. previous cabinet ministers about LGR, elections or local plan, relates to a matter which is the subject of legal proceedings. Members will be aware that in the last 24 hours, there has been a judicial review claim brought by Reform against the government. A council is not part of these legal proceedings, so the matter can be referred to. Requires the disclosure of confidential or exempt information, and lastly, relates to a council employee. Okay. Right, so having laid out the rules, I would ask Councillor Adrian Warwick to make his statement.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you very much. And thank you, Chair and Councillors, for the opportunity to speak on this issue. And it is sad to be here tonight. Labour ministers had been clear local elections must go ahead, right up to the 18th of December, when Steve Reid revealed plans for election cancellations. Clearly, he had seen the polls too. Labour don't want these elections because they will lose. Local Labour politicians have sought to explain the chicken run approach by justifying the County Council's request to be in the first tranche of unitaries. But the Electoral Commission have said that as a matter of principle, we do not think that capacity constraints are a legitimate reason for delaying long-planned elections. Perhaps Labour could justify this if there was certainty that central government has the capacity to stick to the timescales for local government reorganisation. We know that wholesale change is coming, but I am sceptical about the stated timeframes, and we fear further slippage. It may well be 3 years until the new authority takes up the reins. We still do not know if Warwickshire will be 1 or 2 authorities, and we won't know that until after the May elections. In all likelihood, we will be back here again next year, complaining that Labour have postponed elections again. But Labour were elected on one word: change. The substance was unclear, but what change? An end to democratic accountability? The benchmark sent by central government is whether elections can be delivered. The answer from the Chief Executive is clear. The answer and that is a yes. The answer from the Electoral Commission is that elections should only be postponed in exceptional circumstances. The only exceptional circumstance here is that Rugby has members, including its leader, up for election and they fear they will lose. Discussions around town councils and assets of this council, like at Warwickshire County Council, will go on. So must democracy. Local government reorganisation must not be used as cover to frustrate the will of the people. If the leader of the council thinks he's doing a good job, he has the right plans and the right work for Rugby, then put it to the people. Democracy comes first, unless, of course, you're up for election in May and odds on to lose. But if you don't take my word for it, let me give you two quotations. The government's plan could see 10 million people across England denied their voice in local elections in May. Both Labour and Conservatives are running scared of the electorate, allowing councillors to serve terms of up to 7 years without a democratic mandate. We must never allow this to happen again. The law should be changed so that ministers cannot simply delay elections at the stroke of a pen. MPs should also be given a vote over future elections delays and a chance to properly hold the government to account. Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats. And just take Lord Pack's view as well. The right to vote is one of the fundamental rights that people in this country have. Everyone understands there are exceptional circumstances, such as the Second World War and COVID, when elections might need to be cancelled. If there's an emergency, Parliament can legislate very quickly. This is no such emergency. So why is the Liberal group at Rugby so at odds with the view of the national leadership and so aligned to the Labour Party in Rugby? Why does it appear as if Rugby Liberals are going to act so undemocratically? Not in my view, but in the view of their own party. So, to conclude, this council may as well be run by Michael Caine, not Michael Moran, because in my view, they are both in the Self-Preservation Society.
Thank you. Could I ask Davine and Kedwood to...
Hi, Chair. I'm Devon Kedwood, member of the public. Chair, this administration has taken a decision that reveals a deeply worrying attitude to power and accountability, and this committee, I feel, should not let it pass without challenge. I'm speaking on this most serious issue because it goes to the very heart of whether this Labour group respects democracy at all. They have asked the government to cancel our elections in May. We were told by the Cabinet that the cancellation will enable them to continue with their plan for the town in the midst of local government reorganisation uncertainty. Their plan, which they profess is working well so far and that they really want to continue working on. I have to wonder if they are confident in their plans and their positions, why don't they put it to the good people of Rugby to seek a fresh mandate? The only conclusion I can come to is simple really, is that Labour does not want to face the electorate. That isn't leadership. Frankly, it's a disgrace. Cancelling elections allows the Labour group to remain in power without asking our permission, and that should alarm everyone in this room, regardless of party. Because once you establish the precedent that elections can be cancelled for administrative convenience, you are saying that democracy is conditional. If democracy is conditional, then it isn't democracy at all. You do not get to decide that voters are an inconvenience to your plans. I am also not giving the Liberal supposed Democrats a free pass here either. The only representation from them at the Cabinet meeting was the personal views of their deputy leader. Councillor Mackenzie told us the group is not a dictatorship and they would be having a vote. Yet we haven't seen the result. I would expect that given democracy is one of the 7 key principles on which all Lib Dems stand firm, that they must have voted against Labour's cancellation proposal. Also, since their leader, Councillor Roodhouse, was enthusiastically sharing the Lib Dem national petition named Stop the Stitch Up, No More Election Delays, presumably they will be withdrawing their coalition/working group support for Labour imminently. Preaching must be practiced. I am sick and tired of self-service within politics. If you're sharing a petition against elections being cancelled, stand by it and withdraw your support for those who oppose it. If you're confident that you're delivering well for the people of Rugby, stand by it and face an election. If you find that you can't stand on the principles that you want the people of this town to think that you possess, stop doing rugby a disservice by pretending. And one final matter that I would like to raise. I'll be honest, as political groups, when we're facing elections, one of the first things that we look at is the data. We study it to work out where our strengths and our weaknesses lie. Given that, according to electoral calculus, 2 of the councillors who voted to cancel the elections, they are themselves up for election, I wonder, did this data, which shows they're both set to lose their seats to Reform, influence councillors Moran and Livesey's decision-making? Rugby deserves better than a council that avoids elections and asks residents to trust decisions they were never given the chance to endorse. Democracy is not a fair weather activity. To quote a rather well-known Labour MP's farewell speech, "What power have you got? Where did you get it from? To whom are you accountable? And how do we get rid of you?" It was in 2001 that Tony Benn stood up in Parliament and asked those questions. And yet here we are, 25 years down the line, with Rugby residents unable to answer that last question as our democracy is being denied. I urge this committee to scrutinise their request aggressively, to challenge the narrative being presented, and to remember this: democracy does not belong to the Labour group, it belongs to the people of Rugby. Thank you.
Can I pass over to the Scrutiny Committee? Any questions you have for speakers? Councillor Brough.
I have a question for each of the speakers. Ms Kedwood, do you have a particular interest in the May 2026 elections that we should be aware of?
I'm a prospective candidate for the Himwarton ward, but I'd also like to point out that the data that I referenced also shows that I would lose as well.
Thank you. Councillor Warwick, I've no particular dog in this fight as I'm not up for election, but there are precedents out there for delaying and deferring elections that are quite recent. Can you perhaps advise us what they are, as you've been in this game considerably longer than I have?
I can only comment on what the Electoral Commission has said. If you're referring to Warwickshire County Council, as I referred to in my speech, there was talk last year of being in a group of councils put forward, which would have delayed elections. However, this is wholesale unitarisation, and as already been alluded to, we will be back here next year looking to delay again. And I would say to you that from a party that was elected on a mandate of change, saying we're going to do what they did doesn't seem like change to me.
Can I ask a follow-up question, please? Are there any recent regional instances of councils deferring elections because of a reorganisation that you're aware of?
I couldn't comment on specifics.
Are you aware of the deferral of elections in West Northamptonshire, for example?
I am. I can only comment on what is being said by the Electoral Commission and what my personal position is and what the position of Warwickshire Conservatives are.
Apologies. I'm confused, Councillor Warwick, because you seem only to be aware of what the Electoral Commission has said, but you seem strangely unaware of local precedents and regional precedents for deferring elections. I'm surprised to hear that from the councillor's experiences yourself.
Sorry,
Thank
Tony,
you, Chair.
what did... Councillor Gossett.
Could I just ask, why do you feel a precedent's been set when it's Northamptonshire Council? We're talking about Rugby Borough Council and Rugby Borough.
I'm sorry, Chair, is that a question for one of the Scrutiny Committee?
Councillor Gossett, at the moment we are not in debate. It's just questions to
Okay, I'll come
speakers.
back to that then, thank you.
Councillor Peter.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on some of the comments because there's been a lot of discussion both here. I think it was raised at the Cabinet
Is
meeting.
that a question to the Speaker?
Yeah, it is a question to the Speaker and it's a question to Councillor Warwick, who is a Warwickshire County Councillor of some long standing. But I just want to get this absolutely on the record. The request from Warwickshire County Council was not to defer elections. It was to be considered as part of an accelerated unitary group, which had been a long-standing request of the County Council. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct, Councillor Picker. That is true with a very tight time frame. Thank you.
Councillor Parker?
I'm not asking you to predict the future, Councillor Warwick, but we know how long things take and we know delays do happen. What is your expectation about the reorganisation and how long it will take, with a view that next year there are elections in Rugby Borough?
I would imagine we will be back here again next year with the same question, as I alluded to in my speech. And of course, none of us know what the High Court is going to decide on the 18th and 19th of February, as now there is a High Court case on this. And this council will be proceeding for the next month as if councils are taking place regardless, because I believe that's what the injunction says.
One more question, Councillor
So
Freeman.
it's a matter of clarification. There is no injunction in place yet.
Members, John Murphy here, I'm the monitoring officer. There's mention of injunction. I think I want to share with you my limited understanding, albeit limited, of the news that came out last night regarding the judicial review. Reform were in court on the 20th, so that's yesterday, and the judge has given permission, I believe, for a preliminary hearing on the 19th and 20th of February. The normal process for judicial review is that there is a hearing to decide a preliminary issue. Does the party have standing to bring a claim? And then there's a substantive hearing further down the line. Parties can ask for the matter to be expedited, and that is what's happened here. So my understanding is that the preliminary hearing is the 19th, 20th, but the judge will, if the judge decides it's good to go, also deal with the substantive issues. So at this stage, there is no injunction live, let loose out in the wild. It is merely that we all know that come 19th and 20th, the judge will make a decision and we await that outcome. Chair, thank you.
Councillor Mackenzie?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a point of clarification to say that we are certainly not hiding what our views are, and our letter to the Minister is on our local Rugby Borough website for anyone who wishes to see it. Thank you.
Are there any more questions to speakers?
No, I just wanted to make a point of courtesy and apologise to all our guests tonight for the front door being shut. Democracy lives and breathes here, and I apologise for the fact that you had to wait outside in the cold and rain, and I wanted that on record.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Councillor Freeman, is this your last question?
I think so,
Okay.
as we've got other business to deal with this evening. Both speakers eloquently put their case forward, but I didn't see much in way of reference to the report that's before this committee. Would you care to comment on the substance of the report?
I can only comment on the comments of the Electoral Commission and their views. It is for you as a council to debate your report, not for me as a member of the public to comment on it further than that.
Yeah, I echo what Councillor Warwick said. I'm just here to represent the views of myself and members of the public.
Okay, I think we'll call that to a conclusion. I will then ask the Chief Executive to present the report, if I could, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Dan Green, Chief Executive of Rugby Borough Council. Slightly unusually, I feel I should declare an interest as well. In addition to being the Chief Executive, I'm obviously the returning officer, and that's a position that attracts an additional payment for the delivery of elections. So the interest is that if the election goes ahead, I receive that payment. If it doesn't go ahead, I don't receive that payment. So in the interest of transparency, just to make that clear. So just in terms of setting the context around the council report and the decision, as members will be aware, on the 18th of December of last year, the council received a letter from the Minister of State for Local Government and Homelessness, Alison McGovern. The letter was addressed to leaders of those councils who had elections planned for May 2026, and it requested that by midnight On the 15th of January, leaders of those councils set out their views on the postponement of local elections, and importantly, whether they considered that this could release essential capacity to deliver local government reorganisation. It was relatively short notice, but in consultation with the monitoring officer, we referred to the Constitution. We considered that the matter was regarding the resourcing of the council, and therefore the appropriate mechanism to make that decision was via the Cabinet, because that is a responsibility of the Cabinet. Following the Christmas break, a further addendum report was produced, and this was to support that decision-making process. It considered some of the key issues, such as the previous precedents for postponing elections, together with a summary of a typical programme of work associated with local government reorganisation. So that programme of work built on discussions that we'd had with sector bodies like the LGA, with authorities that had been through local government reorganisation, and indeed with our partners around Warwickshire. So, in my opinion, was an accurate representation of the task before us. Again, as members of the committee will be aware, Cabinet resolved that their position was that the Council should express a view to Government that the 2026 election should be postponed to release that essential capacity. And again, that decision was called in on the basis that councillors had not had the opportunity to scrutinise the matter prior to the Cabinet meeting. So again, just a little more context around the substantive matter. We have, for the last 12 months now, through the monthly All Leaders group meetings, effectively looked at local government reorganisation, the work that we need to do and the position that the council ought to take on that. In the early days, that focused on what shape local government reorganisation should take for Warwickshire. It looked at the single unitary model and the two unitary model and evaluated them against each other. We've also discussed the various nuances that members would like to see in Rugby, and one that's been very clear throughout has been a town council, strengthening local parish councils and really making sure we have robust local decision making. More recently, that meeting, and in fact the meeting of that group last night, has really focused on the work that we need to do in advance of local government reorganisation, and in particular the work that we need to do in advance of the Minister's decision on the future shape of local government in Warwickshire. So I thought it was important that that I drew your attention in particular to that particular period, the next 6 months really. So as the addendum report to Cabinet set out, one of the key pieces of work for us to really progress at pace now is what we're calling the discovery phase. So that's the work that focuses internally on Rugby Borough Council and mapping and baselining things like our people, our contracts, our finances, our assets, IT systems. And that's no small task. The point is that we need to do that well. It's crucial that we do that well because the subsequent steps of local government reorganisation, such as designing the new authorities, really hinges on that accurate information. In addition to that discovery work, this initial phase also includes work that's been spoken about in this chamber quite extensively around a community governance review. So that's looking at things like a potential town council for Rugby, as well as looking at how we work with our parish councils and how that can be strengthened moving forwards. So that's a piece of work that we're looking to progress over the coming months. Beyond that internal work and looking at the community governance review, the other really resource-intensive part of the work that we need to do immediately is to come together with the other Warwickshire councils, so the other 4 district and borough councils and the county council. We need to be looking at our baseline positions collectively, so looking at the difference between our people contracts, the difference between our finances, our computer systems, all these things that really make a council tick. And we need to be ensuring that we come together in that way so that any future shape of local government, one unitary or two, meets all legal requirements as well as the needs of our residents. So in summary, in order to deliver that safe and legal transition to a unitary council, and that's the term that's always used is safe and legal, but to me that's a minimum. We want to be delivering better than that. There is a significant amount of work to be done in a relatively short time frame. including progress that should be made prior to the Minister's decision on the future shape of local government in Warwickshire. At the same time, it's important to note that we need to continue to deliver really high quality services to the residents of the borough, and often these are services that people rely upon. Doing these two things concurrently, preparing for a new organisation and delivering our business as usual, simply isn't possible within the existing resource envelope. We need to ensure that we have adequate additional resource to enable us to almost separate those two work streams and have business as usual continuing while we do the local government reorganisation work. So this is the advice that I've provided Cabinet, and I believe that this is the advice that was in mind when Cabinet came to their conclusions on the 8th of January. Thank you.
Councillor Rowe?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add to that, and because of the nature of the of some of the comments which have taken a very particular dimension, I really want to respond. I think the first thing is to put really clearly on record, it's with a profound sense of regret any election is cancelled. So I wouldn't be involved in local democracy if I didn't think that it had inherent value. The second point, though, with a distinct change of tact, is what's come out locally, particularly in recent weeks since that mid-December letter. I'm so incredibly disappointed and regretful to hear that level of what I consider to be such blatant hypocrisy, because in criticising the integrity of individuals and actually officer base and institutions, it damages the very entities that are held to be sacred. And so the reality is that taken together, what we face now in Warwickshire is the greatest level of reorganisation seen in 50 years. I believe the reports are clear that running elections during this period would compromise that ability to focus on the day-to-day and to deliver reorganisation and devolution effectively. It would place unacceptable strain on capacity, distract from critical decisions, and it would risk slowing down the progress at exactly the time the government wants us to increase that pace. Also, it's important to note that across Warwickshire, other councils are not in this position as Rugby, let alone as limited in terms of resource as Rugby. So at the very time we're standing here, and last year we all stood in a great moment of unity to advocate a Rugby model where Rugby can be protected and at the centre of a unitary authority, we're actually putting a compromise on our ability to make that case. So this is not an argument about elections, it's an argument about being honest about what can and cannot be done. There is no doubt that Rugby Borough Council is to be abolished. The part of local government reorganisation that we're going to see is absolutely all-encompassing. It will change everything that we see about local government and local councils. It's not speculative, and it's the express direction that we've been given. And we've discussed it so many times now in this chamber and in private meetings with the leadership of all parties. So it's regretful, again, to use that word, that perhaps the opposition group don't understand the gravity of what's in front of us. But there's only so many times that message can be put. But the real fundamental issue I want to make clear now is that in doing this research into this process, there is such a long-established and understood precedent for governments to do this. Postponing elections since 1974, when the whole local government landscape was changed dramatically, elections have been postponed in those relevant authorities. Since 74, let's go forward a bit. For example, between 95 and 96, elections in Lancashire, Avon and Somerset, Humberside, Milton Keynes, Brighton, Poole, Bournemouth, Darlington, Luton, Stoke, Leicester, I could go on, were all postponed. For example, 2007 to 2010, Cornwall, Shropshire, Wiltshire, Exeter, Norwich, Cheshire, all had elections deferred for 12 months. On and on this precedent goes. It is nothing unusual. If I could indulge you to go on. Rishi Sunak, if you remember him, when he was Minister of Local Government, he postponed elections in Buckinghamshire, Dorset and Northamptonshire in 2018 and 2019. including actual all-out elections, on the grounds that holding elections to councils due to be abolished would risk confusing voters and incur unjustifiable cost. He stated at the time, and I quote, "Deciding to make this postponement, the government has had regard both to the importance of local elections as the foundation of our democracy, but also ensuring the accountability of councils in 2019, brackets, that was with regards to Buckinghamshire. It would risk confusing the electorate and involve significant costs." So, out with the old and in with the new. Kemi Badenoch, or Badenoch, as Minister for Local Government, she postponed county elections in Cumbria in 22, explicitly to enable arrangements for a smooth transition to local government for functions to a unitary authority. Now, I'm conscious that members of the Conservative Party are actively contemplating, working, switching to reform, whatever may be the case. So it's probably also important that I reference Robert Jenrick. When he was Secretary of State in the Conservative government in 21, he postponed elections in North Yorkshire and Somerset, stating plainly that proceeding with elections while reorganising councils was a live entity, risks confusing voters again, and would be hard to justify where members could be elected for short terms. Also, for information, Jenrick also made clear a caveat that he made his decision irrespective of whether or not his future decisions on LGR may or may not change. Now, let me be clear. Unlike the aforementioned Conservative ministers, I'm not going to insult the public. This isn't about suggesting they'll be easily confused. But the point remains, there is a very, very established principle that in the midst of local government reorganisation, this is a standard approach. But we are here now in 2026. Councils across the country of different colours have made such a decision. So Pendle, Cheltenham, Liberal Democrat, Harlow, East Sussex, West Sussex, Suffolk County Conservative, Hastings Green Party and Burnley Independent all have made this difficult decision. Now, I guess I'm conscious of what's been said already, but to those that suggest that there's concerns about democratic backsliding, I'd offer a response that defending democracy is ensuring that elections are credible, they're consequential, and they're properly supported. So it does not mean pretending institutions can do everything and all at once. So, and I'll quote somebody, "Ultimately, I recognise that the implication of progressing reorganisation and devolution at pace to the benefit of my community will require a postponement of elections. And I ask, in what I've done in my letter, I've ultimately asked that the Secretary of State does consider that, making that arrangement for postponement." Almost word for word, that's a quote from Izzy Seckham, a decision taken in secret for the Conservatives of Warwickshire. The fact that Rugby Conservatives are now turning 180 degrees, I think is absolutely shameful. So what we have now is political opportunism, and I think it's to the detriment of the institution that we're trying to protect. Thanks.
Could I go to scrutiny for debate? Councillor Parker.
Thank you. Well, I wasn't going to trump with quotes because I felt that our guests here tonight didn't want to hear it. But Councillor Moran, you leave me no choice. You have put the cards on the table, and I have an obligation to quote the veteran Labour MP and someone who I personally admire, Graham Stringer, who has said, "A Labour government should not be taking the vote away from 3.7 million people. It is completely unprecedented for a Labour government to do that." If we're going to play, I guess let's play. The Speaker of the House today is quoted in the Daily Telegraph in their campaign to reinstate the elections stolen from the people of Britain, as saying in a private letter to Reform that it was to a Reform councillor, I believe, that has been obtained by ITV News, "I do not believe in cancelling elections." Those are the words from the Speaker of the House. I'm not playing this game. Let's get on to the business of what we're here to do tonight. A very sensible man called John Murphy, our Chief Officer for Legal and Governance, has told councillors that we are the conscience of this authority, that this scrutiny committee sits to challenge and to debate and to bring out the things that we need to inform decisions. And we've got a lot to get through tonight. And I want to say, first of all, for those members of the public who have come for the second part of the agenda, I want to apologise. I've got a million questions. I probably won't need to answer all of them, but I've got a lot of questions. So I hope that you will indulge me some of that. Chair, I don't know how you want to do this. You know me. I will, go like a battering ram for a bit and then want to
Councillor
come
Parker,
back.
please just ask a question.
Okay, so can I ask Dan, the Chief Executive, for some clarity on the timeline of when of the decision making in Rugby? So, the letter came from Alison McGovern on the 18th of December. Is that right? Were there any conversations that you were party to or privy to or knew about that this was already a consideration? Or did the letter from Alison McGovern come as a surprise to you?
Councillor Parker, can I encourage the questions are actually to the portfolio holder rather than the officer?
That's fine. I just want an answer. I don't really care who gives it me.
Sorry, really quick point of order from your question, from your things at the beginning. This was a question that was asked twice at Cabinet and answered at Cabinet.
As scrutiny, we can ask questions again. Yes, members.
Let freedom ring.
Well, again, Councillor Parker, it's just, again, fascinating with you that you want to play quotes on trumps on quotes, but not those that are really relevant or local. But anyway, as I said at Cabinet multiple times, no, there were no discussions or any type of dialogue prior to the 18th of December.
So a supplementary question to that. Why then, 2 days before the letter was received, on the 16th of December, during the local briefing for councillors, did Councillor Livesey ask in the Teams chat, what happens if the local elections are cancelled, pending LGR? And the response from Nicola Smith was, we have no indication that local elections in 2026 are planned to be cancelled. It is likely that the 2027 elections will be cancelled. Can we have some clarity on that statement?
I think you're being deliberately misleading. Annie, at the time, during December, there was various chatter about what may or may not happen. There is always chatter. Excuse me, but one of the speakers, I forget his name, talked about pontificating of whether or not elections may or may not be cancelled next year. He is indulging in that same conjecture that the councillor you refer to did in December.
So you are saying, for the Scrutiny Committee, that your members had no knowledge of anything going on in the background at all. And that comment about the 2026 elections being cancelled was just purely speculation. Is that what you're telling the Scrutiny Committee tonight?
So Chair, I do believe pantomime season is over. I've answered the question once. That should be sufficient.
Councillor Marion, I'm satisfied that you have answered the question. Could I move to another councillor, please? Councillor Parker, you can come back.
I have many, many more questions, so I do want them answered.
Councillor Freeman, if I can ask you to speak.
Well, I don't think I want to play the game of political knockabout this evening. I think that one of the purposes of scrutiny is to look at the decision that was actually made. And I'm interested in whether it was a lawful decision. Does the law permit the Secretary of State to defer an election? And I assume Councillor Moran took advice from the relevant officers, and it was indeed confirmed it is something the Secretary of State can lawfully do.
Thank you, Chair. The Secretary of State's not here, so I don't know whether he or she has had advice on that matter. All we can do as a council officer is, when we receive such letters as officers, we contacted the administration and we advised them that if they wanted to respond, I set out the constitutional gateway for doing so, and that's what we did. I think your question is probably more pertinent to the judicial review that will be happening later on, but I have no knowledge as to the state of mind for the Secretary of State.
Well, if I can perhaps ask a supplementary, is it within the power of this council to cancel an election? Is this something that we do independent of any other body or party?
Chair, no. It is not in the power of this council to cancel this election. What we did was, according to the Constitution, we assessed it, identified that it was a resourcing issue primarily, and followed our Constitution, which led us to a cabinet decision. There was a report drafted by officers, and then the elected administration made their decision. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Picker.
I mean, I think Councillor Freeman has sort of almost accidentally wandered towards the salient point, which is we shouldn't be having this conversation because it is absolutely farcical for central government to have essentially tried to pass the buck. I mean, as someone who has been a cabinet member, has had to take decisions, this is not really a decision for this council. It's an act of cowardice by your government, I'm afraid. But going to the legality or otherwise of the decision by the council and by the cabinet, because I do want to pull at a few threads that seem to come up, and I think they were hinted at by the chief executive in his commentary, which is the business as usual element, because there was a lot of commentary during the cabinet decision about policy programmes and decisions being undertaken by the council and the risks of being able to implement them going forward if elections were to take place. I was wondering whether initially the leader of the council might like to elaborate on what he meant by that, or what he thought his colleagues may have meant by that.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Picker. The first thing I wanted to make clear, and I think this is, it's not a nuance, it's simply reading what's in black and white. The government did not ask me to make a decision. The government asked me to give a view. And I think that isn't one of cowardice. And I think unlike the other instances, and I lose track whether it's 40, 50, 60 plus councils where elections were postponed in local government reorganisation, as per standard practice, the government then presumably had some sort of liaison with the councils regarding resources. The fact this government is asking for an opinion, a overt opinion, before then the government making the decision, I don't think represents cowardice. I think with regards to you querying, let's put it that way, why certain cabinet members talked about policy matters, and if you want strayed into activities, that is life and people are human and there is some politics in it. I'll only refer you back to the two speakers who are both members of your own party who couldn't help but talk about politics left, right and centre. Indeed, when we're talking about the matter at hand, the deflection was to go back to politics. So if in question about the nature of these decisions in this council and its activity, it's only, I think, human, and it's only to be expected that at times the wider discussion will stray into politics. That in itself is just being an open, expansive process.
Just a follow-up to that, so I would gently point out that the speakers are not decision makers, so they are not necessarily bound to have regard to relevant considerations when making determinations or commentary. They have no authority here. We do. You do. So if they're straying off topic into politics, so be it. So I guess my question is, the question from government was essential capacity. So that is essentially that the council cannot function if we are to go ahead with elections and meet LGR. I guess my question is, some of the comments that were made were that of the decisions made by the administration to pursue a policy programme and the challenges that an election may have for those. And I would gently put it to the administration that that is not the same as essential capacity for local government reorganisation.
Thank you, Councillor Picker. And again, I genuinely, and I always say this whenever we have these exchanges, I do welcome your contributions. Your removal from the front bench is a sore detriment to your party's standing. I think have a revolution, whatever you guys do, it happens a lot. But seriously, the points that you're making both can be true. And I think, again, respectfully, a lot has changed in the way in which this council operates since June 2024. The level of activity and engagement across the council is, respectfully, probably very different to that which you remember in your time. I think, as the council chief executive alluded to, a lot of the work leading up to elections does become multidisciplinary. And this council is, as a matter of fact, stripped to the bare. Our resources are very, very limited. We've got the most exceptional staff doing their very, very best. And you cannot put this expression, 2 pounds of sugar into a pound bag. We've got a huge amount to do on the day-to-day council work. But the level of preparation and work that's got to be done for local government reorganisation is massive. And in 10, 20, 30 years' time, when we're all living in a different county structure, we'll remember the contribution that this council made to getting that right for rugby then than we will anything else. So we've got to focus on what's important.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask a bit more of a detailed question. And I wanted to just pull on the thread and understand really how much work there will be to do all the review that would be needed to bring forth a rugby town council, and with that the review of the parishes, fully engaging with our residents over, do we have a town council, what services does it do, where the boundaries sit, because that is a plank of democracy and part of LGR really, because we will be the only large town without a town council if we don't put one together. And I'm sure there's nobody in this chamber who is against us having a town council as a part of the democratic process. So I'd like to really understand, and I'm pleased to see that Electoral Services here is as well, so thank you, Sarah, for coming, to really understand really how many months of work is that, which skill set, how much that overlaps with the electoral team, and if we were aiming to have that forward for a 2027 election, how realistic is that to go forward? Thank you.
Chair, I work very closely with the elections team, and Sarah and I have been speaking regularly on this matter. With regard to the town council, there's an element of crystal ball gazing, but there is potential for a 9 to 12 month process being involved. That is dependent upon a number of consultations and plans. We are working together and have been speaking regularly about getting expert advice to help us on a roadmap for the town council, because as officers we recognise that there's a one-shot opportunity to get it right. And when we launch, and we're trying to launch as quickly as possible, we want to have a clear roadmap that we can adhere to, that we've identified the risks, we know where the bumps are, and so we can land it. But at this stage, I'm afraid it is crystal ball gazing to an extent, but time estimate would be a 9 to 12 month process. Chair.
Councillor Parker.
Yeah, can I ask the Chief Executive a question about his remit and the role of officers within the council? May I? I wasn't allowed to earlier, but this is a direct question for him and his team.
Is it relevant to this
Yes.
debate? Okay.
Dan, if the elections went ahead and a change of governance came in, that, you know, people lost their seats and a new administration took over, would you work with them going forward from May?
Sorry, point of order, Chair. Point of order, Chair. That's not acceptable.
Right.
Could,
Is it,
Councillor Parker,
okay, I'll go rhetorical. Is it not the case that elections happen 3 out of every 4 years, and the chips fall where they may, and officers of this council work with administrations as they are elected. Is that not the case? These are not
Councillor
difficult
Parker,
questions.
I think it really needs to be processed before
Please tell me why they're not appropriate, because I have supplemental. You are saying that there is no capacity to run the elections concurrently with the local government review. But if the elections went ahead in 3 months' time, the work of the local government review would continue, would it not? Does the work of the local government review continue regardless of who leads the council?
I'll go. The short answer is yes. But there is a very good reason why across the country for the best part of 50 years, local government reorganisation and local elections do not take place at the same time as a preferred route. Because by definition, you cannot get the best of two outcomes. And then it becomes which ultimately is the focus and the priority for the residents of Rugby going forward. Now, I appreciate that sometimes not everyone here in this chamber is a resident of Rugby, and we've got to try and do our best for this council. That's what we're trying to do.
I have supplementals, if I may, with the indulgence of the committee.
Councillor Parker, you make it very directly to the portfolio holder on the issue tonight.
The Chief Executive said in his submission tonight that cancelling the elections would release that essential capacity. Release that essential capacity. So can I ask some clarifications about the capacity of the elections team? With the indulgence of our guests, councillors have been provided with some background information about this team, and that is the essential capacity that we are releasing into, if the elections were cancelled, they would be released to go forth and do their work on local government review. So we've just been told that, excuse me, we have 3.7 FTEs, full-time equivalents, for those not in HR. So those 3.7 members of staff are essential capacity. Can I just remind councillors from last week's scrutiny committee, and a normal committee if there is ever one, sickness levels are running at 17 plus days on average for every employee of this council. And there are in excess of 400 members of staff for FTEs within the council. So each council employee takes an average of 17 days off for sickness each year, as we heard at scrutiny last week, and all members expressed their disappointment with those figures. So is it a case...
Sorry, Chair, can I make a point to clarify here? There's a deliberate attempt to misquote something. There was a wider context of what was being said. Equally, at scrutiny last week, it was agreed that there was no context and no sort of reference to other councils. So there's something being taken out of context here.
I'm sorry, I don't agree. What's been reported here was what was being said at scrutiny. It's not out of context.
There's a lot more context to it.
No, I will not accept that. We heard with our own ears last week. Let's play the tape if we need to. We heard your own member of staff say that the average was in excess of 17 days. And this is pertinent information when we are talking about essential capacity. After all, the council officers are too busy to run elections. They've got to be repurposed for local government reorganisation. I am saying, for the purpose of this scrutiny, I am reminding councillors and our guests that one of the reasons we are so busy is that 17 days are lost each employee, as we heard last week. Can I get to where I was going with this? Because this wasn't the thread I was pulling at. But I really object to being told that the facts that we were presented with less than a week ago my integrity is being called into question. May the Leader of the Council please apologise and retract his earlier statement.
What I said then and what I say now is that the quote of that particular number, there's a lot of context and work we agreed at Scrutiny last week to come back to reference, not including but not limited to how that figure has changed and I believe has reduced in recent years, but also compared to other councils. But the salient point here is that Rugby Borough Council hasn't taken upon itself to decide that it is difficult to run elections at the same time as other essential works of local government reorganisation. It is established practice across the country, and dare I say, it is the same reason that the Warwickshire leader of Conservatives of the council made that decision last year for the 2025 elections. There's nothing new here. This is just political grandstanding.
We are trying to get to the bottom of the capacity challenges within this organisation, which is the reason, one of the two reasons, along with cost, that Reid is wanting councils. Right, let's get to some detail. Can we get to the detail, please? I have a question.
Councillor Parker, I think I need to give somebody else a chance.
Please, if the question is, what are these people going to be doing?
Excuse me.
What have they been? Okay, I care about our staff. I care about their working conditions. I care about their roles and responsibilities.
Sorry,
I care about their union representation. These are the questions I want to ask.
Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. I'm rather disappointed in Councillor Parker. At one stage, she was straying into areas we really don't want to stray into. You can't possibly, as a member of Scrutiny, unless you have the most compelling evidence, accuse the Chief Executive of being possibly biased in his approach, that he wouldn't work with one administration.
Can we not have a debate about ourselves?
Well, I want to put a marker down here. We have a lot of very professional officers here.
Are there any more questions?
Well, I'm coming to the question, Chair, and I'd appreciate it if I could get to it. I was trying to set the context here. Members rely on officers to advise them, and we employ a lot of extremely experienced and qualified officers to give us options in order to make a decision. Now, we are at the moment debating a decision that was made at an extraordinary cabinet meeting a week ago, and we seem to have strayed into territory where, well, I just don't want to go there. But I think Councillor Parker was making an attempt to get to the nub of the matter, which is its capacity. You can't do two very difficult things at once if your own personal capacity and that of your team only allows you to do one. You'll end up failing on one or the other, or possibly both.
What is the question, Councillor?
The question is, in arriving at the advice about the capacity of the council officers to deal with local government reorganisation, did the Chief Executive take advice? Did he take soundings from his various departments? Did he speak to peers in other authorities? What was his approach to giving this advice to the Leader of the Council?
Yeah, through you, Chair. If I can try and attempt, I think the question that Councillor Parker started on actually as well, because I think there was a good question in there which referenced the wording of this could release essential capacity, and I mentioned those words in my introduction. Just as a point of clarity on that, that was me citing the wording of the letter, that was the request. Councillor Parker also asked about the 3.7 members of staff within the electoral services team and how this is a call on officer capacity at any time. And again, as Councillor Freeman's pointed out, my position is to advise, it's not to make the decision on this, but the elections process doesn't just involve the elections team. And, you know, every time I speak about the elections team, I do like to make the point that I think they're second to none as an elections team, but running an election involves a a vast number of people from across the organisation. We have a communications officer who's already part of the project team, who's planning towards the election should they go ahead. We have legal officers who advise us. We have financial officers who advise us. We have a contact centre who deal with all of the queries. So when I'm asked to advise on what the capacity requirements of delivering an election are, I don't refer purely to the number of people that are in the elections team. I try to refer to the number of people across the whole organisation that contribute to the delivery of a legal election, and it is a vast number. In response to Councillor Freeman's question, in giving this advice to Cabinet, did I take any advice from my colleagues? Yes, of course, is the answer. I will always take advice from the teams that are most affected by any decision such as this. I've spoken to them about what the demand is in terms of running an election. We actually, as I mentioned, have a monthly elections project running from October, November time. So we have these conversations constantly, and it's not a piece of advice that I'd give in isolation of my colleagues. I hope that helps.
Last supplementary, please.
Well, as an experienced officer, if you're aware that there are holidays, sickness, and other reasonable contingencies that you should take into account, do you take them into account when planning a project of this size and complexity?
Yes.
Thank you.
Can this be the last question, please?
I'm afraid it might actually end up being a slight series of questions, because I do just want to go back to that original Cabinet report, which is what it is that we should be focusing on. So paragraph 4.14 makes it very, very clear that the elections team were able to go ahead and deliver lawful and transparent elections in the event that the government chose to do yet another one of their U-turns and bring it forward. So presumably that remains the case, because what I'm really struggling with is this extremely high, to my mind, and I appreciate it might not be shared amongst everyone, the essential capacity to deliver elections, because the thing that we're sort of all dancing around, and I know Councillor Moran's enjoyed listing off the whole long lists of reasons why local government elections didn't take place. The vast majority of those cases where the councils were due to be abolished, as they are here, and therefore there was no point in the government's eyes, in the Secretary of State's eyes, of holding elections to councils that ceased to be. So the ministers used their powers under the Local Government Act to change those elections. They have that lawful power. That is not the question that we're being asked, that you were asked. The question is releasing essential capacity, and I'm struggling to reconcile the report that says that we are on time, on budget, and on schedule to deliver elections with, well, we can't deliver these elections, we need to release essential capacity. That, to my mind, is a contradiction, I'm afraid. However, I do just have one final point, and I think this might not be something that can be answered this evening, and it relates to the judicial review. My understanding is that the council can request to be an interested party. I appreciate that decision probably hasn't been taken yet. Can I ask for some clarity as to how any decision will be communicated to members and the wider public?
Well, the last one, I assume that'll be by email, so look out for your inbox. I think in respect to the core question that you asked, Councillor Picker, I don't think it's a contradiction at all. I think what it is a very detailed and nuanced question. So you're right, the government does, as you've said, have the right under various statutory powers. Again, I keep going back, as has been exercised time and time again across the country over the years. Because, and it's in my opinion, it's inarguable. We've got this situation in this year where local government reorganisation, like 1974, is going at pace across the country. You've got various instances of councils playing politics and coming to particular decisions. But take away 2026 or from December 25 onwards, the absolutely established principle that local government reorganisation does, by definition, not cancel, let's get the words right, postpones elections to the correct available opportunity. But the question, Councillor Picker, that you're saying is that, yes, as of the 15th of December, elections had to be on track. But the compromise or the challenge would be delivering local government reorganisation in the context of the time frame from a team that's already constrained. So there would have to be, there is an inherent weakness in trying to deliver the two things. And that was the viewpoint that I was asked for, that I communicated.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a slightly sideways question, but I hope you'd indulge me on this. One of the things that we were talking about today in budget setting was around the structural change orders that will be coming in, and government. I know Councillor Morin and Dan Green, you were both on a call with ministers yesterday. So my understanding of the structural change orders is actually affects our ability to spend money that we're budgeting now. So we're putting in plans, as you all do, as everybody does at this point in the year, for what we're going to spend next year. Bear with me, I do have it does relate to LGR and capacity. When that structural change order comes in, from my understanding of what we were discussing, money that we have budgeted to spend, we might not be allowed to spend, and therefore we have to really accelerate 2026-27 budgetary spending early so that it actually is allowed to be spent. No, I know you're sniggering there next to me, but actually this is actually really...
I am. We just can't believe what we're hearing, but go on.
I'm trying to understand and grapple with the fact that structural change orders are coming in. They will stop you spending money that's actually in your budget to spend if it's not already. So say, for example, you've put in a capital budget to spend on park improvements, but you haven't actually signed the contract to do it. They can potentially say you're not doing it, okay? Just to try and give a real life example. So that actually says, well, if you think you've got to want to get all that done, it means rather than doing things throughout the year, you've got to try and accelerate the program forward. And that actually, it doesn't matter who wants to deliver those programs. I'm not making myself clear, am I? It fundamentally impacts on what this council actually is able to do within a matter of months. But also how much work needs to get done in Q1 and Q2 of this coming financial municipal year to get ahead of that structural change order. And that actually puts a lot more work on officers to try and achieve that work ahead of Q1 and Q2. Now, I appreciate a different administration might have different priorities, but they do still sit with the budget that's given to them at the point of elections. So in that sense, we've lived with your budget. Now, the next administration, if there were elections, would live with our budget. So it's no. I threw that over to see if you can explain this better than I have, and actually whether this is something that impacts on what staff can actually do.
No, thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. You make an absolutely excellent point. And it hits to a key element, the heart of this, in two different ways. In the first instance, as you say, the reality is that this council, in order to do its normal day-to-day business, has to sort of really hit this year with pace, because by definition, work, projects, services, new policies, new ideas have to be really in train and developed before that clamp down or that constraint comes down. So that requires a huge amount of work from every officer, from all elected members. It's also important to point out, it also requires, again, who knows, but an element of consultation and engagement with the public and local businesses. Some of that may be constrained during PERDA periods. Certainly be restricted.
Sorry, it won't turn off.
No, that's okay. It'll be restricted and challenged in any immediate election period until any new administration settles in. So the engagement for the public aspect into this, in this really, really critically important year, will be compromised through an election process. The other point I wanted to make that you hit on there is that the reality, this idea that Rugby Borough Council will not be constrained. New members are elected over the course of the summer. They'll have barely put away their election manifestos, and the summer will be there. There'll be a month or two before a constraints plan is put in place by central government. Any new authority elected in May will not be an authority as you would recognise it historically. This is a council in transition. And so as Warwickshire Conservatives said last year, as time and time again across the country, in the middle of local government reorganisation, elections are an issue. And that's what we have here. There is nothing irregular about this.
I think I'm going to sum up now. We need to move on to another item.
I want an answer to the question I came
Sorry,
here for,
Councillor
and
Parker.
I have been persistently...
I would like to ask some more questions myself, so could you...
Yeah, and Chair, with the respect, you know, I want these questions asked.
Councillor, we need to move on to another day.
Has the 3.7 members of the electoral team been...
Councillor,
been stood down?
I am the chair of this meeting.
I think the people of Rugby have a right to know. They are paying for these officers, and we want to protect them and make sure that if their roles and responsibilities have changed, have they been properly supported? Have the unions been consulted? Has their job descriptions been changed? If we are repurposing these staff members, they are valued individuals, and I want to know...
Councillor, can you decease, please?
I want to know because I want to give them the courtesy that they deserve from our councillors.
Okay, I have some questions of my own. Okay. Firstly, this has been costed £160,000 saving. We have mentioned from last scrutiny that there are some issues in terms of day sickness, potentially, you know, PDRs not being as good as they are, and a 2 million spent on external. So, in other words, we're living a problem of not maybe having the resources to deliver vital services because of these issues. Anyway, so I'm not quite sure why this is the rod that breaks the back that we can't have elections. So that's my first question. Why can't we use reserves in order to have elections? Or, sorry, it shouldn't be reserves for elections. It should be reserves for local government.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and answer that in two ways. I think the first point is that, you know, what you've hit on and what you've alluded to is, frankly, something that became very apparent when I took over as leadership in June 24, is that in many, many respects that the council is threadbare. And so it is a case of trying to maximise resources. I think the issue about staff sickness and welfare that was discussed at length last week is a really important issue. We're trying to do our best. With respect to the last councillor, you know, absolutely every staff member is treated with courtesy and respect. That isn't an issue in this administration. I think, in answer specifically to your comment, I think the nature of the electoral services team is a special skill, and it's not a surprise that in the context of the biggest local government reorganisation seen for 50 years, those skills are keenly in demand, and there's a high degree of professionalism. So I go back to the point I think Councillor Freeman said, that it is by definition impossible, if not very challenging, to ask an officer to do multiple roles at the same time.
A further question is actually to do with some of the comments you've made. you've referred to other postponements. Most of those, however, were for 12 months. This isn't, I think, a 12-month referment. This is likely to be 2 years at least. In fact, there will be no more Rugby Borough elections. So that's one thing I'd like to take you down to with. The other one was you quoted some councils that have made this decision. So I would probably counter with Arbor District Council, Basildon Borough Council, Blackburn Council, Cannock Chase Council, Chorley Borough Council, City of Lincoln Council, I'm just going to read it, Exeter Council. It carries on, right? It's Ipswich Borough Council, Norwich City Council, Peterborough City Council, Preston City Council, Redditch Borough Council, Rugby comes next, Rugby Borough Council, Stevenage Borough Council, Tamworth Borough Council. There is a theme here. These are all Labour councils. Of that list of 63 councils, I understand, were asked this question, 28 of them have cancelled the election. 21 of those are Labour councils. There is a Lib Dem in there. There are some Conservatives. There's a Green and there's a extraordinary one. Which one that was? Yeah, there's an independent in there for Burnley, right? So they've decided it. So this comes over, given it's 75% Labour councillors, of a minority that have chosen to cancel elections, comes over as political. So I ask you, is this a political decision?
First of all, thank you, Councillor Lawrence, Chair, for both those questions, because they're both, you know, again, if I take the point, they're fair questions, so I'll answer them. At the first point, in regards to postponements, again, I don't mean this in a dismissive way, but there's so much out there in terms of what local government reorganisation means for Rugby and Warwickshire that I don't know how it's disseminating respectfully into your party, because the reality is that come towards the end of this year, into next, all those kind of changes that the government will lay down, and then from May 27, a new authority is elected. That is then the superior authority. So whilst there may not be further Rugby Borough Council elections, the new overarching authority will be in place. This will be a shadow authority. So I think the talk about year dates does still hold true for all of those examples in the past. The point that you're making about the political colour of councils making decisions, to be honest, I go back to the opening comment about this kind of politicking. We are in an era of having just had a general election last year with a landslide victory. So with regards, okay, thank you very much, 2024. Well, with regards to comments about sort of the accuracy about political data, it wasn't very accurate in the summer of 24. There is a new government. It is fairly typical as a politician yourself to know that during kind of the middle years, opposition parties do want to make hay and do want to make headlines. So for those non-Labour authorities who want to persist with the council elections, and they're able to do that's for them. That's for them and their electorate as to how they can continue with local government reorganisation. I don't think we could be more transparent about this. And I think the fact that certain councils are not looking to postpone, they may or may not have taken political decisions about what's best for them locally. But I go back to the point that what's happened for the previous 50 years is that it's an established procedure to postpone elections in the midst of local government reorganisation.
Okay, it better be a final one. Councillor Pigger.
So we've had a lot of conversation about politics and political parties, so I do just therefore want to put something directly to the Leader of the Council regarding the debate at Cabinet, which has gone unmentioned thus far, though I did wonder whether it might come up. During the Council meeting, you addressed a colleague from Warwickshire who was in the public gallery regarding the challenges that they have running Warwickshire County Council. Can I ask what relevance that had to the decision you were being asked to make?
Nothing specifically, no. No. I make the comment, well, why mention it? Because it was in response to comments from those sources. I think the reality is that what I've tried to say from the outset is that we've got to focus on delivering what's best for the residents of Rugby, which is in the context of this, setting in place a new structure of local governance for the next 50 years. I'm not, I'm not kind of immune to the idea that anything like this can be politicised. What we're trying to do is our very best.
Okay, I think we have to bring this to an end now. I apologise. I did give opportunity for all councillors to talk before I talked. I've got to bring this to an end. Now, I want to bring something to a vote here because I think we should, as scrutiny, consider votes. We have some options in front of us. Right. I think this is a cancellation in all terms. It's a postponement for a year, 2 years, to the point it goes nowhere. It is based upon cost. I do understand what Dan Green has said. There is a need to do this work. I don't think anybody's disputing this. But what cost are we putting on democracy? I think this is where we're getting down into debate, and we all individually have to start making that decision. I will propose to scrutiny that we refer this back to Cabinet for a reconsideration. This is weighted by the fact that there is a likely judicial review coming and the elections may happen anyway. So we're going to have to deal with the problem. So I am going to put it to a vote that we vote on whether we bring this back to Cabinet for reconsideration. Okay. Yes, Councillor Picker.
I'm happy to second that and ask for a recorded vote.
Could I ask for another councillor to support that recorded vote? Okay, so that's Councillor Parker, Garcia and Picker for the record. So it's for or against, for bringing it back to Cabinet. And if we could call out the names, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just go alphabetically. And if you could state whether you're for the motion, against, or you're abstaining. So first of all, Councillor Freeman. Against. Councillor Garcia. For. Councillor Lovence.
For.
Councillor Mackenzie. Against. Councillor Parker.
For.
Councillor Picker. Councillor Sayani. Councillor Srivastava. And Councillor Thomas.
So the motion isn't carried. What I then suggest is that there are some recommendations through the debate, and we should just take those back to consideration. I think that's an easy thing for everybody on that one. So we just note what we've said in this debate, and we ask the officers to note that.
And Chair, I'm happy to submit my questions for written responses.
Absolutely, and we have to time box sometimes.
That's fine.
So
that's fine.
Appreciate.
I'll send them by email, and that's kind.
Are we all agreed that we just bring back the ask Cabinet and to respond to the general comments that have been made during this meeting? Okay, thank you. That brings that item to a close. That has been an hour and a half. If people want to very quickly get up and stretch, I would certainly allow everybody to do that. Okay. stretch, not go for a walk. Okay, so item 4 of the agenda, Rugby Borough Local Plan 2025-2042, Regulation 19, consultation and submission. Okay, so I'm going to do the same long speech as I did before on speakers. I'm rather obliged to do it, so apologies for this. I invite each speaker to introduce themselves and state who they represent before making their statement. Rules of public speaking. Speakers will have 5 minutes to make their statements. I will be taking speakers one after the other. At the end of the last speaker, I will invite any members of Scrutiny to put questions to the speakers. After the final question, there is no more involvement for the public speakers. Alarm will sound when their time has expired. The statement should then be brought to a halt. No extra time will be allowed. No visual aids or handouts may be used, and no questions to officers or councillors will be allowed. No members of the public are allowed to participate in the debate. As outlined in the Council's constitution, speeches will not permitted to have the following: a matter for which RBC does not have responsibility or which affects the borough, your own personal circumstances, or to a specific housing, planning, licensing or grant application, is defamatory, frivolous or offensive, is substantially the same as a question statement which has been put at a meeting of the council in the past 6 months and has already been heard, i.e. previous cabinet meetings about LGR, elections or local plan. Relates to a matter which is subject to a legal proceeding. Members will be aware that the last 24 hours there's been a judicial review. I don't think that's relevant to this now. And what else is that? Requires the disclosure of confidential or exempt information or relates to a council employee. Okay, so I have a running order. Councillor Adrian Warwick, I invite you to be the first speaker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of my division, Foss and Wolvie Parish Council, and many thanks to you and this committee for the opportunity to address you. At a recent meeting, Councillor Mackenzie said she was inspired to get involved with local politics because of a bad local plan. Well, congratulations. This one will inspire a whole new generation of local politicians, if that is the case. And this is the first time in my 25 years around local politics I've called a party known to call its own work in. Apparently it's allowed you Conservatives to engage, unless of course you want to make any changes, because that's not allowed. This is an odd sort of engagement. From its inception, the plan has been critically flawed, and I am not aiming this at officers. They are the instruments of policy, and I'm incredibly grateful to both Nicola Smith and Neil Holly here for their work. But rather the fault lies with the Labour Party's national policy stating to deliver 1.5 million homes over a 5-year period. And these officers have to find a way to make this happen and to deliver our portion of that allocation. Of course, large urban extensions take time to plan and build. Too much time for this 5-year target. So to please their central government paymasters, taking advice from our MP, the idea of this plan is to disperse the allocations. In my village, Wolvie, the allocations from 2016 have still not been delivered. One site is not fully sold, and the other has not been started, apparently due to a lack of demand. So how will we deliver 210 more? Rugby has seen a collapse of housing growth. You're working on the budget, so are we. Figures that are going into the cabinet papers show Rugby's growth is virtually a quarter, 26% last year of what was predicted. Goes to show how shallow this build, baby build policy is, trumpeted by a local MP, perhaps in the pursuit of a ministerial job. It's clearly failing. Labour have pulled the shutters down on the economy and pushed this to a breaking point. People cannot afford to buy a home, so there goes your 5-year housing supply, especially as Angela Rayner has prevented carry forward from previous years. The desperate solution is to place hundreds of homes in rural villages, and it's clearly flawed. And dare I say, a touch hypocritical. This council has declared a climate emergency. Sustainable transport, low car dependency must be our future. However, it then proposes hundreds of homes, Brinklow, Wolvie, Clifton, Newton, Woolston, Long Lawford. that require a total dependency on car travel for employment and recreation. Warwickshire County Council were clear in their objection, as their already ballooning home-to-school transport would be added to by a six-figure sum, as would the ability to reach those in need in remote areas. All of this adding costs and pressures on our care services. This local plan would simply load future unitary or unitaries with unsustainable costs and damages our county's environment. This plan has caused upset and distress to so many of my residents. They fear the loss of valued land, and the promised grey belt review, Angela Rayner's scruffy scrubland and old car parks policy, threatens to turn swathes of beautiful agricultural land into a developer's paradise. This plan opens the door to a bleak future for this borough. On employment, in the north, we already have Fraser Group Anstey development approved by this administration. We're now expected to take a further hit at Walsgrave, causing disruption, gridlock, and impacting on our beautiful Coombe Abbey Country Park. It takes no account of the disruption that will already be caused by National Highways plans to upgrade the Walsgrave Junction. I think the most surprising part is not that Labour have brought it forward, but the Liberals want to be complicit in the implementation of a clearly failing government housing strategy. I thought that the Liberal Democrats in Rugby would stand up for the rural communities. Their complicity will show the people of Rugby that only the Conservatives understand rural life. Thank you, Chair.
I have down Davine. Kevin, I believe you're not speaking. Okay, thank you. Could I ask Ian Davis to speak next, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Ian Davis. I'm a retired town planner and I'm a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute. I'm chair of Newton and Biggin Parish Council, but I'm also tonight representing the Coton Park Residents Association and the Coton East Committee. I've only got 5 minutes, so while I've got views on the wider plan, I'll just restrict myself to those as they impact on Newton and Biggin. I think there's more development proposed in Newton and Biggin than any other parish, but that's probably understandable given its location on the urban edge. However, it does mean that Rugby Borough Council has to show care and sensitivity if the character of the area and the quality of life of residents is to be maintained. There's 4 sites in the parish referenced in the local plan, and I'll look at these in turn. Firstly is Hillcrest Farm. That's 25 houses in the centre of Newton. It looks to me as a logical allocation of a brownfield site, and I've got nothing further to say on that. There's a residential allocation on Newton Manor Lane of 285 houses. This sees an eastward expansion of the urban area into open countryside, and that's the subject of considerable concern and opposition locally. The developer's master plan is actually quite attractive, with lots of open spaces, allotments and an orchard. Rugby Borough Council, though, has already increased the number on the site from 240 in the preferred option to 285, so it's hoped that doesn't compromise the attractive layout. The development will also require substantial improvements to Newton Manor Lane and the St Thomas Cross Junction, matters on which the plan is currently silent. Thirdly, St Thomas Cross Fields. The preferred option allocated this site for a secondary school, but fortunately that's now been dropped, and the site is allocated for open space. That's been very well received locally, and it will improve the connectivity of open spaces locally and across Rugby. And it's hoped that Rugby Borough Council delivers on its commitment on this site. And then fourthly and finally, Coton East. This site and many of the neighbouring houses, whilst it's in Coton, is actually in the parished area. The last local plan, allocated this site for a mix of employment and residential. Planning permission was granted for this, and many residents bought nearby houses on that basis. It's now proposed that the site be 100% employment. Paragraph 127 of the National Planning Policy Framework says that where a planning authority doesn't think that there is a reasonable chance of a development coming forward, it should be reallocated to a deliverable use. It was the landowner who said that residential was undeliverable, but the NPPF doesn't instruct planning authorities to reallocate to any use of the landowner's choosing, and obviously discretion should be applied. The problem here is compounded, I think, in that the developer has promoted a master plan just before Christmas, showing the site covered in large logistics sheds in close proximity to existing houses, with some smaller employment units in the southwest corner. I think this is wholly inappropriate and unacceptable, particularly to those who had bought nearby houses in good faith. And the point, I think, has been illustrated to local residents in that there is a large logistics shed under construction at the other end of Coton near Aldi, which is a graphic illustration to residents of just how big these things are nowadays. However, if Rugby Borough Council decides to continue with logistics on the site or employment on the site, then I think the local plan should look to mitigate the impact of this. The report to Cabinet somewhat sidesteps this because in paragraph 1121 it says, and I quote, "Concern has been expressed about the impact. The local plan allocates land. It does not determine detailed layout of sites." Well, that's true, and it might be acceptable on less potentially damaging sites, but I think kicking the can down the road isn't really appropriate here. The local plan should contain mitigating policies, including Rugby Borough Council distancing itself from that developer's master plan, because in the eyes of the public round there, it is one and the same thing. They are assuming that that is Rugby Borough's plan for the area. Secondly, increasing the area of open space and landscape buffers, particularly near to existing residential and the Five Arches nature site. Thirdly, restricting building heights, particularly at the site's boundaries. And fourthly, routing of commercial traffic away from the Rugby Free School. Lastly, can I just thank the officers and councillors who've engaged with the Parish Council and the Coton Park residents in an attempt to address concerns. Certain undertakings have been given relating to allocated sites and the open spaces, which goes some way to meeting the concern of the residents, and I look forward to those undertakings becoming firm commitments. Thank you, Chair. That was timely, wasn't it?
Thank you. Well timed. Very good. Could I invite Dr. Robert Ashford to talk next?
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Firstly, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to speak. Okay. My name is Robert Ashford. I'm speaking on behalf of Thurlaston Parish Council, and I'm their planning guy. Now, our particular concern is South West Rugby's Symmetry Park Phase 2, which you will see as Site ID 17 in the local plan update. The Council and indeed Thurlaston residents strongly object to this site, even in the reduced quantum of 60,000 square metres. We do this because, well, it would add to the environmental and ecological damage to our conservation area that we've already endured with Symmetry Park Phase 1. We've kind of got experience of this. Firstly, in terms of visual degradation, these sheds can be seen from over a mile away. The proximate sheds are actually 3 metres higher than the government inspector, Mike Hayden, who looked into the last local plan, actually allowed. Our nighttime environment is almost ruined by industrial lighting. And you'll not believe this, its effluent has overflowed our water treatment plant, and the Severn Trent tankers which go in to rescue it have trashed all our curbs and verges. So we know what we're dealing with here, and extending Symmetry Park just makes matters even worse. Let's just go through it. There'd be a loss of the best and most versatile agricultural land, which is contrary to the NPPF and indeed the current, albeit slightly out of date, Rugby local plan. There'd be a loss and degradation of the wildlife sites at the disused railway and Avon Valley, again contrary to the NPPF and current Rugby local plan. The danger posed by surface water runoff and associated flood risk have not been mitigated. In our view, the transport links are inadequate, and it's a bad place to put B8 warehousing anyway. There are no sensible routes to the north and west. Traffic will clog at obvious pinch points around Avon Valley School, Newbold Road, Elliott's Field, and further north to the M6, M1 and A14. These have been identified in the current Rugby Strategic Transport Assessment. And it would compromise the separation between Thurlaston, Dunchurch and Rugby Town that's been regarded as important by Rugby Borough Council's recent areas of separation study. Lastly, I claim that there's no need for this development. And that's because there are other better placed B8 warehousing sites in the Regulation 19 draft. Now, my reading of it says that the current draft is proposing 540,000 square metres of new B8 warehousing space. That's new space that hasn't already been agreed. Now, looking at the development needs topic paper put out last December, there appears to be a gross need of 792,000 square metres for the period 2022 to 2045. But of that, 481,000 have already been agreed. So this leaves a requirement of only 311,000 square metres. This is my reading of it, and I've read many of these things. I'm not 100% I'm sure I'm right, but I think it's something you guys ought to be looking into. So we're talking about an oversupply of B8 warehousing in the region of almost 230,000 square metres. So we don't need it. Now, I've got to move on to say that the requirements which actually drive the so-called need come from a thing called the HEDNA, which I doubt you're familiar with, the Housing and Economic Development Needs Assessment, and the WMSES, or the West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study, and their related alignment papers. Now, these studies are restricted to what they call the Functional Economic Market Area, or FEMA, and these are 6 adjacent borough and district authorities. You probably all know what they are, but I would point out that they ignore Rugby's proximity to Durf and Magna Park, both of which are much better placed for B8 warehousing in every conceivable respect, but can't be taken into account by anybody who just looks at the more limited economic market area.
Could you make your final statement, please?
I claim that I would ask you, on behalf of Thurston Parish Council, to drop the site. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask John Reid to make his statement, please?
Good evening, councillors. I represent Brinklow Parish Council. I'm their chairman. I hope John Murphy tells me that most people will have received the soundness statement that I sent out earlier on in the week. It lays out a lot of the proposition that we want to talk about. We feel that the housing allocation at Brinklow has been unfairly contributed. The Brinklow allocation was fundamentally flawed from the moment it entered the local plan process. The evidence base incorrectly stated that Brinklow has a primary school. It does not. It has a 1880s built infant school only for those up to the age of 5. We also have some difficulty in expressing to you the proportion of development in our village. We think there's 411 homes in the village, but Rugby seem to think there's 528. I can't count 116, the difference, but it takes the proportion of building up from a 61% expansion to nearly 80%. Now, we've had some communication from Neil and Nicola, but Brinklow Parish Council is not afraid of talking to people, and we talk to the landowners, most of whom are quite prepared to talk to us to look at the way forward. And I would say to you that we've found from our discussions with the landowners that some of the proposals made in this local plan cannot be made. Land will not be available, and I just wish that Rugby had asked that question first before they published. We have a great deal of traffic, and I'm not going to talk more about Magna Park. That's Tony's deal. Magna Park, Walsgrave and Anstey are still to be added to the traffic that we experience in Brinklow. We have a viable alternative to the 315, and we would welcome talking to the planners to see whether we can get a reasonable number of premises built and we have already have information from landowners that they would be prepared to proceed. And I'm going to say that I was very disappointed that Rugby Borough Council took the option of putting the Yew Tree Hill garage sites on auction when it would be an absolutely ideal opportunity for them to build some properties that were properly affordable, because of course there would be no land costs. I'm quite prepared to take any questions that anybody has. The rest of the statement you've already had in writing.
Thank you. Could I invite Richard Alanak to talk next?
Thank you, Chair. Richard Alanak. I run a Facebook page which is dedicated to improving planning in our borough. Late this afternoon we had 3,708 members. I should like to thank the Chair for the opportunity to give evidence to this committee. I believe that the Cabinet's proposal for our next local plan is better than the preferred options, and I hope that the other 36 councillors, including all the members of this committee, are now busy working up amendments to improve it still further before it goes off for the Regulation 19 consultation. But if in doubt, the Cabinet's proposal is better than no plan. I would like to assist this committee reflect on how we have ended up with an imperfect process and an imperfect plan. The preferred options plan covered 3 years too many and failed to take account of prime sites the council owned. It strove to meet the arithmetic of Angela Rayner's housing targets and fell into the trap of proposing too many unsustainable greenfield sites. This caused unnecessary anguish and worry to too many of our residents. The council owes a deep debt of gratitude to the 6,296 people who took the time to respond and guide the council back towards a better path. The council's proposal rests on inadequate information, incorrect information, and fails to take account of some of its consultants' recommendations. In the MPPF, HMG say that building on our best and most versatile BMV farmland should be avoided. Yet the Cabinet does not know which of its chosen sites are BMV. Our Rugby Borough Council was advised it did not know which of its chosen sites were BMV last May, yet it did not go out and gather this information. As a result, its sustainability consultants were forced to conclude that it is clear that the local plan will result in the loss of a quantum of BMV agricultural land that might be considered significant. Viable sites were identified in the urban capacity study, which have not found their way into the Cabinet's proposals, and some of the sites which were included were put in at a lower density than the consultants recommended. This has placed unnecessary pressure on unsustainable greenfield sites elsewhere. Rugby Borough Council has published Councillor Finch's strategic transport assessment, but has failed to add the health warning which should inevitably accompany anything from that source. He has not assessed the local plan which the Cabinet is proposing. The assessment contains ludicrous assumptions, like 1 in 5 of Rugby's residents cycling to work. Critically, as the traffic model was loaded with the housing sites being proposed, it kept crashing because of traffic jams at the Gibbet Hill roundabout. So the road model was hacked to remove all barriers to movement at that junction. To cope with the extra traffic, that roundabout would have to be upgraded this summer. Yet the Chief Planning Officer advises The earliest we could expect relief is the early 2030s. In the 17 minutes the Cabinet spent evaluating their plan, that roundabout was not mentioned once. The Cabinet's plan provides over 1 million square metres of mainly warehousing space, principally to provide workspace for people who live outside our borough. Yet no extra land is set aside for the 500 extra healthcare workers the consultants say we will need to support our rising and ageing population. The consultants say this population will need an extra 474 affordable homes a year. The Cabinet has not said how their plans measure up, but I published my own calculations which suggest that their plan will only deliver 77 affordable homes a year.
I've got to bring you to stop there. I apologise, but it's got to be the same rule for everybody. Okay. Just before we go to questions, I think I just want to acknowledge that we have some written statements from other people. So I appreciate there's a statement from Brinklow. There is also one from Stretton-on-Dunsmore, one from Ryton West, and one from Woolston and Lawford, which you should have been able to see. So I appreciate those written statements as well as the speeches today. We can't question those, but we can certainly reference them. Could I open up to Scrutiny Committee's questions to speakers?
Could I ask, Mr. Reid, you referenced something about landowners and feeling that the land wasn't available. Obviously, the council can't put in land that hasn't been hasn't come forward. What makes you think that that's changed? And has he told the council that?
I don't think so.
Right. Okay. Rightio. Thank you.
Could I just request, if you answer a question, if you can use a microphone so the camera pans, please. Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question for Councillor Reid. I declared an interest earlier on because I do visit Brinklow fairly often, and I read his submission with some interest. But there are a couple of things that leapt out at me, and one was about a primary school, and the assertion is made that 250 house development alone is likely to generate 600 children, which is 2.4 children per household. How was this figure arrived at?
Well, isn't that the statutory family size? 2.4 children. It probably is a bit less in the current circumstances, but we're talking about building 3 and 4 bedroom houses. They're for families, and they'll inevitably bring their children with them.
Well, if perhaps I can try.
Does it really matter whether it's 600 kids or 350?
Councillor Reid,
it's still.
I'm sure the chair will support me as I'm asking the question. So I did look this up. I did look this up in the Office of National Statistics, and the average number of primary school children and secondary school children, when you put those together, you've overstated it by over 6 times. The average we can expect is 95. Now, if I accept your logic that every single house generates 2.4 school-aged children, the county council is going to have to get places for 22,896 children over the course of the local plan. This seems somewhat exaggerated, to say the least. To try and give you some context, Mr. Reid.
I take your point, but if our health services and other services are overrun and at capacity at the moment, it doesn't really matter whether it's 500 kids or 250. They still can't get in our surgeries.
Have some something to contribute to this. The County Council's own projections suggest that the need for secondary school children at the moment is around 350, and they're planning to put them at Avon Valley School. A number of primary schools across the borough are undersubscribed. Now, the reason I put this to you is that if you're going to make assertions, please back them up with some evidence, because we're here to scrutinise, and it's very difficult to scrutinise something which is fundamentally incorrect.
Did you want me to answer that? Yeah. I mean, well, firstly, as Councillor Reid said, you've overstated the number of primary schools in Brinklow by 1. So if Councillor Reid's figures are incorrect, well, so is the report. It's an infant school only. The rest of the children are taken by car to the Revel at Monks Kirby, which you are no doubt aware of if you're familiar with Brinklow. And yes, again, we come back to the dispersal strategy and the standard calculations and the cost aspects for moving both coached and SEND children to the locations that they require. But as Councillor Reid said, you've got a figure in there which may be overstated, but I would come back and say you've also overstated the fact that they've got a primary school when they haven't. Primary capacity, as Councillor Garcia will know well, is delivered by Monks Kirby. It is infant only at Brinklow.
Need to use the microphone if you're going to.
Yeah, I think I may have one that's not as working as well as it could. You've made the assertion that GP provision is unsafe, undeliverable, and already full, and you're referring to the Revel surgery in Brinklow, I gather. So, if it's full and it's at capacity, why, when you go onto the Revel surgery website, are you directed to a link to register online with the surgery?
I've no idea, but we have in writing the fact that they are at capacity, they cannot extend, and they are limited by all sorts of other factors, including car park and foot access.
Well, they may have said that at some point, but you've made an assertion here that's not borne out by the evidence.
I can find it in writing if you wish.
I think yeah. Point is made. Councillor Picker is next.
Thank you. So this was just coming back to a comment that Mr Davis made regarding the MPPF paragraph 127 and the allocation changes at Coton Park East. So just for clarity, the MPPF says that where the local planning authority considers there to be no reasonable prospect of an application coming forward, I'd just appreciate a little more development from you on the point you were making about the change in allocation from the extant plan to the proposed draft local plan.
Sure, I'm happy to give my perspective on it, but I think if you want probably an entirely accurate answer, you're probably better directing it to your officers. My understanding is that the last local plan adopted 2019 allocated the site for a mix of employment to the north and 475 houses on the remainder of the site to the south. That subsequently got outline planning permission with a master plan. The owner of the site did some soft marketing and discovered that there was very, very limited interest from house builders to acquire the land for those 475 houses. There were a number of reasons for that, but the principal one is that the sole access to the site is through an employment area, through some recently completed warehousing. And you could understand that from a house builder's point of view, that's not a great access if you're trying to sell aspirational houses to people. And so this is, I think what I've got so far is fact. Moving forward is my understanding is that the landowner then made a submission to Rugby Borough Council, presumably during the call for sites, to ask for the site to be reallocated to 100% employment because there was little or no interest in the residential. Now, that is fine, and what Rugby, I quoted from the MPPF, because that envisages just that situation where a site has been allocated for use A, and if the planning authority is satisfied that there is no reasonable chance of it coming forward, then it ought to reallocate it for use B. What the NPPF doesn't say is you have to go along with whatever the landowner wants. Now, the landowner in this case, and I can understand why, it's a great location for a logistics site. It's just off junction 1 of the M6, prime logistics site. The land value would be considerably more, I would assume, for logistics than it would be for residential, particularly, as I said, given the problems of the access. What I don't know is when the landowner did their soft marketing of the site, at what value they expected to get from the site. Now, if they were marketing it as a premium residential site, then clearly they were going to be disappointed because it's not a premium residential site because of the access to it. So did they market it at a site that, at a value that reflected the realities of the site, or did they market it at effectively an inflated site, inflated value? And I simply don't know the answer to that. And your officers may be able to help you with that or not.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point in response to Councillor Freeman. All surgeries are directing patients to their digital offer, and it should not be taken that that is an indication that there is capacity at that surgery. They offer it to everyone, and it is the cornerstone of the NHS's digital strategy. So, you know, I think that was an unfortunate confluence of those 2 points, but I just wanted to make that.
Councillor Freeman, I hope it's not Brinklow. Councillor Freeman.
No, I'd actually like to ask a question of Mr. Allenack. Now, you spoke, I think, with some authority. You tried to cover a great deal of detail in your allocated 5 minutes. I don't think you quite finished. But you are the administrator, moderator of a Facebook group called Rugby About Turn. And its headline is, I'll quote it. If I get this quote wrong, please correct me. For everyone who wants to raise the quality of town and country planning in Rugby. Now, is it not the case that we can go round and round the various details in the local plan and supporting documents? I think it's a very impressive 923 pages. And we could nitpick around the details of what the consultants have recommended, whether the number of options that have been examined by consultants, the one that the planning officers have recommended is the correct one, and we could end up in an endless argument about the detail. So, given that you speak with some authority, you definitely have an interest in planning, yes. Is that interest something that suggests you have some expertise?
Thank you, Chair. There have been a number of questions on my Facebook site from members of the Labour Party recently about what experience and what qualification I have on planning matters. Interestingly, I don't recall those being directed when the current portfolio holder was appointed. However, as I'm now being asked that precise question in a public meeting, even though I'm not accountable to the electorate, I will endeavour to answer it. So I have been a member of a planning committee. Whilst I was a member of the planning committee, I took part in 2 public inquiries on compulsory purchase orders in order to be able to implement planning decisions in my working life. And I welcome the opportunity to take Councillor Freeman on a tour of the Greater London area, and I could show him a number of buildings which I was actively involved in seeking planning permission for and funding and so forth. So we could go to the University Centre in Harlow. We could go to the new residential development on the University of East London. We could go to the Art and Architecture building on the University of East London. And we could go to the magnificent library building on the University of East London, which is so popular that at the weekends you can see residents of Newham and the surrounding areas, and they come out there in their fine clothes, particularly after they got married. You know, it's a tradition to take pictures of yourself in a fine setting. I've seen it done in the War Memorial in Brinklow. But anyway, against that magnificent library building, University of East London, we see people there. The Centre for Students with Learning Difficulties and Disabilities at Barnet and Southgate College. And then I was there, I spent longer than any single Rugby Borough councillor during the examination in public of the last local plan. When Rugby Borough Council abandoned its own decision to refuse planning permission for the Ashlawn Gardens site, we were there for 2 days. I pointed out, heavily involved in the campaign to have Rugby Free Secondary School next to Rugby Free Primary School in its natural site in Coton Park East, where there was an allocation for 2 years. Sadly, Councillor Warwick's compatriot, Councillor Kerr, did not agree with that allocation. So I have had significant experience both applying for and securing planning permission, acting as councillors do on planning committees, and also putting evidence to suggest improvements to planning applications and to local plans.
A follow-up question, if you'll allow me.
Yeah, one follow-up.
I did choose my words carefully because I asked about expertise. Now, this is a scrutiny committee. We're inquiring about the soundness of the decision that's been made. And I think you've pointed out a number of flaws that you believe in the revised local plan. And you've explained very, very well that you've had an interest in planning and that you've been involved in planning committees. But there are 2 gentlemen sitting next to you who are qualified in planning matters. Now, if you hold yourself out to be an expert, are you not supposed to be qualified in your chosen area of expertise? Is your expertise in the matter of technical planning, such as the expertise that our planning officers have? Or are you an academic who has written a set text for people who take planning and related degrees? I mean, no, well, I think it's pertinent because...
Freeman, can he actually answer the question?
Well, the point I'm making, one can hold oneself out to be an expert, but you've had to have walked the walk and talk the talk in order to do it. Your site is about opinion, your opinion. Do you feel you are qualified to say to our planning officers, you consistently get it wrong?
So I've sketched the experience which I've had, which is substantial. In terms of paper qualifications, then that would be narrow and restricted to matters of biodiversity, net gain, and habitat assessment, where I have 2 relevant first degrees, and also I have the FISC level 3, which is the minimum qualification which is required in order to be able to do habitat assessments. Thank you.
Councillor Parker.
I just want to apologise for the discourtesy shown to you. No one in this borough could have devoted more time to not only this local plan, but the previous one. And I am disappointed, and I'm choosing my words carefully, in Councillor Freeman's tone, and I want to apologise for the nature of that and the tone. I wanted to ask you, and I don't expect you to give me an, hourly. How many hours do you think you've dedicated since you set up the principal way of engagement of this community with planning matters in Rugby, how many hours do you think you've dedicated to it?
If you were to ask my wife, she would say way too many. So the examination in public was held in 2018, and I would guess on average I would have been spending something like 2 hours a day since then to 2026 on planning matters. And of course, as I explained to Councillor Freeman, before that I had experience in planning matters in other areas.
Thank you for your dedication to the borough.
Okay, I would like to take that to halt on questions to speakers now. Therefore, I invite the Chief Officer for Growth and Investment to bring a report through.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Scrutiny. What I want to go through tonight is the Cabinet report that went to Cabinet on the 6th of January. This sets out the pre-submission plan referred to as the Regulation 19 plan. This Cabinet report is a summary it's of all of the work that's gone on. It's not a debate on individual sites, and it sets out the process, that statutory process, and the reasoning behind the decisions taken. So just in terms of the process to date, since it last came before members, we did a Regulation 18 preferred options consultation. We held events in April and May of 2025. Appendix 5 of the Cabinet report sets out a summary of those responses. Some of the big items that are sort of a borough-wide issue, rather than, again, site-specific. There was an ask to reduce the plan period, to reduce the size of the buffer in relation to housing, to look at the use of brownfield sites, comments about insufficient evidence being collected, and also issues regarding the lack of infrastructure. So over the summer, my officers and in a development strategy team spent commissioning the expert evidence that we need to do to move from the Reg 18 to the Reg 19. This consisted of a strategic transport assessment, which we've heard this evening was carried out by Warwickshire County Council, landscape assessments and greenbelt assessments. We also undertook an urban capacity study to look at the brownfield sites in the borough. And in relation to infrastructure, in addition to the formal consultations, we had further consultations with Warwickshire County Council in relation to education and in relation to highways. We also had consultations with the University of Hospitals for Coventry and Warwickshire, and also the Integrated Care Board, who actually decide doctor capacity and where additional capacity is needed. We also, different to something that we've ever done before at this council, is we commissioned our own education capacity assessment based on data collected by the County Council. This allowed us, in consultation with the County Council, to have a far more robust assessment of education, and it allowed us to determine different quantums of sites and what that actually made to secondary and primary school places across the borough. And we, in addition to those consultation events in April and May, we also, as I think has been alluded to by some of the speakers, have met further with community groups, with parish councillors, with landowners and developers to hear their concerns, their comments, and look at ways in which we can meet those. So what did we do then after the summer? Well, as officers, we reviewed all of the sites based on the evidence that had been collected and those independent advice of consultants. We met with all of the political groups. We explained to those political groups why certain elements of evidence meant certain sites were ruled in and ruled out. And all groups were able to feed into that process. We then move on to the decisions taken by the administration to get to a Reg 19 plan, following advice from officers. So, listening to what came out of the consultation, the plan period has been reduced from 2045 to 2042. We've tried to limit the size of the buffer. We've reduced the housing allocations in Brinklow and Wolvie. we've removed the allocations in Dunchurch and Hillmorton. Through the urban capacity study, an additional 700 homes on brownfield land have been identified. We've reduced the size of the employment allocation at South West Rugby, and our landscape studies have informed separation areas in Clifton upon Dunsmore and Dunchurch, something that isn't in the current local plan. And also what isn't in the current local plan is an area of elevated landscape sensitivity for the Rainsbrook Valley. I already had here a question that I think many have raised, and actually we've actually heard it here tonight, which is particularly with relation to Coton Park and also the safeguarded land at South West Rugby. Why haven't they been allocated for residential, or why haven't they been kept as residential as they are in the current local plan in relation to Coton Park? Well, in terms of when we allocate sites, we have to allocate on the basis that the site is available. So the landowner needs to tell us that it is available and available for that use. In relation to both of these sites, the landowner said that they are available for employment use and not residential. And so we've heard reference to the MPPF, and a lot of that paragraph is about plan making, but it's also about decision making in terms of when you've got an allocation in the plan and the evidence that you have to go through if someone just puts a planning application in for a contrary use. In terms of when you do a call for sites, there's no requirement on the landowner to say what efforts they've gone to try and market their sites for their current allocated use. What they're saying is, this is the use that we're proposing, that we put the site forward to you. So in both of those cases, they've said that it's only available for employment. We've taken advice from the Planning Inspectorate about can we allocate land for use against the landowner's wishes, and they've advised that there are significant issues with doing such a thing, because actually it goes to the deliverability of the plan and the soundness of the plan. Because if the landowner is saying that land is not available for that use, then your plan is not deliverable. So in relation to South West Rugby, we've looked to reduce the amount of employment on that site. And in terms of Coton Park, myself and Neil Holly have met with residents and with parish councils, and we have looked at ways in which we can strengthen the protections, if that is to be allocated for employment, to actually ensure that there is an appropriate separation between the residential and the employment. Now, I've given my commitment to those residents that there will be a plan that will be updated as part of the public consultation, because it's minor changes to that plan, which will show a landscape buffer, which will identify the areas for the small-scale employment units, because that particular site is proposed to have both large-scale and small-scale units. The small-scale units are needed to deliver the identified need in the council's economic strategy. So there'll be identified areas for the small-scale and for the larger scale. We'll also be looking to introduce a design code for that site, so that can actually prescribe building heights, and that will be subject to a separate consultation process. And the item that we are still having discussions with Warwickshire County Council on is about the access routes to the site, and whether there can be multiple access routes by both of the employment roads that are currently there. So we may not be able to get to a complete conclusion on the highways, because a lot of that is more detailed design work, but all of those items can be detailed in that new policy for Coton Park with that plan. Turning to clarify what a Reg 19 plan is, as I said earlier, it's a pre-submission plan, and it is subject to consultation, a statutory 6-week consultation on soundness. That is what we are asking, and that is what we're required to ask under the legislation, about whether the plan is sound. Following that consultation, the plan will be submitted for independent examination by a planning inspector. We are proposing to do a number of consultation events like we did last time, locating those consultation events in the most affected communities, and we will also be inviting WELC, so the Association of Parish Councils, to also have a briefing from officers. In terms of what we've heard tonight, and as I've said, this is not about getting into commentary on individual sites. Where we are now in the process is about a test of soundness of the plan. If after the consultation process we are to take sites out and substitute them with other sites, that would require us to redo a number of significant pieces of evidence, which will take a significant amount of time to do. So there is in any of this a risk factor that all members, when this is before them at council, need to consider, is that there are a number of timescale issues that are outside of this council's control, but have risks for the council going forward and for the residents of this borough. The things that we absolutely know is that the planning system, the plan-making system, as of December 2026, we can no longer submit a plan under the current rules. And therefore, if we don't submit a plan by then, we need to wait for the new rules to come in, and then we would have to start the process again. And that will then take a number of years. As we've heard earlier at length, we're also subject to local government reorganisation. So if we haven't submitted before the end of the year, we will then be into local government reorganisation, and it will then be an amount of time before a plan can come forward. There is also a further risk in reducing the plan period, which is what a lot of residents wanted us to do, that we have to have a sound plan when we adopt with a 15-year time horizon, which effectively is April 2027. If we don't submit in good time so that we can get an examination in public and then back to council by April 2027, we won't have a sound plan to adopt. So we don't even have months and months this year in which to re-go over and over these sites, because we will run out of time. And all of these consequences equal no plan. And no plan means that we will not have an up-to-date plan in terms of the National Planning Policy Framework, and we will not have a 5-year housing land supply, which means that we are at risk from unfettered development across the borough. And so it's my view that it's absolutely essential that we have a local plan going into local government reorganisation that is then saved until any new unitary decide to do a new plan. So up until a new plan and a new unitary is brought forward, the policies in the Rugby Borough Plan would stay in force in the determination of applications going forward. With all that said, as the Council's Chief Planning Officer, it is my personal view and professional view that this process to date has been evidence-led. It's taken account of national planning policy, it's taken account of the Council's corporate strategy and the Council's economic strategy. The plan that has been presented to Cabinet is therefore, in my view, sound, viable and deliverable. And Chair, if you may, I also want to bring a matter to members' attention this evening. As part of the evidence gathering during the summer and autumn, as I've referred to previously, by development strategy officers, those officers discovered a landscape assessment for South West Rugby that was commissioned in 2017 as part of the evidence base for the current local plan. It appears that this landscape assessment was never published and was never submitted for examination. As members will probably be aware, I wasn't here during the last local plan process, and I started in late 2021. The entirety of my development strategy team, including Neil as the manager, have been recruited since I joined. There therefore are no officers in the development strategy team who were present in 2017, and so we are unable as officers to ascertain why this document was not published. When this matter was brought to my attention before Christmas by my officers, I immediately sought the advice of Council and informed my line manager, the chief executive and the monitoring officer. The legal advice I received from Council is that the issue regarding the failure to publish evidence is a matter for the last local plan process, and that plan process was subject to independent examination. The Council is also currently reviewing this matter further. In relation to this local plan, we need to make sure that we have up-to-date evidence, and therefore Node, who have carried out the other landscape evidence in the Rainsbrook Valley and elsewhere for this local plan, have undertaken a new up-to-date study. This will be published tomorrow on the Council's website, and for transparency, I also consider that it's prudent to publish the 2017 study as well. Going forward, only the most up-to-date evidence can be considered for plan making and the determination of planning applications. Therefore, the published as of tomorrow evidence of January 2026 will be the most up-to-date landscape evidence. I just want to reiterate at this point that this is not a matter for the consideration of the Regulation 19 plan that we're here to discuss tonight, and that at some point will go on to Council. But I wanted to make members aware at the first possible opportunity of this, and I do so, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola, for your honesty and transparency on that. I repeat what you've just said. This isn't for debate this evening. We're debating the new proposed local plan. I've been assured that measures are being taken that this won't happen again, and I probably would refer this off to audit committee to ensure that that happens. Okay.
Chair, sorry, if I could make just a comment on behalf of the administration with regards to this report. As soon as we were aware, we held a meeting with all the relevant parties, and anything relevant to the previous administration or the previous local plan, we've referenced outside legal advice as to how to disclose it.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson, do you want to add anything to the...
Thank you, if I may. Yeah, I think I'd like to set the tone for the debate that we are here to have, which is about the Regulation 19 and the local plan that has been, the proposed local plan that has been approved by Cabinet and is due to go to full Council. I just want to reflect how professional that the Chief Officer for Growth and Investment is, Nicola, in her presentation of the plan, and she's very ably supported in all these things by Neil Holly as well. We have an exceptional team, and I have absolute confidence in the process that they have gone through in being evidence-led. And I appreciate that, you know, out of the hundreds of pages of evidence, you could pick out paragraphs or phrases and say, oh, this bit hasn't been taken into account, or this wording isn't quite accurate. However, you know, on my very steep learning curve in terms of learning around planning and learning a lot from Nicola and colleagues, is in planning it's rarely that simple, and it is a case of looking at the weight of different pieces of evidence and weighing those things up. And I have absolute confidence in their ability to do that. And I think it far supersedes any capability of anybody else in this chamber in terms of planning qualifications and experience. So, you know, my role in this then is more around oversight. It's about setting the strategy and the principles and the guiding principles of ensuring that we have robust processes of consultation, that we do consultation, that we genuinely listen. And I think that's very well reflected in the outcome and the changes from Regulation 18 to Regulation 19, and the long list of changes that have been referenced. And I thank Richard Alanak for recognising that and recognising the improvement on the plan. So I think we've had a very good, robust process. And Nicola did mention that, you know, we gave opportunity for every political group to have access to the appropriate information and be able to contribute. So we've tried to take this forward in as apolitical way as possible as well, and provide those opportunities. I genuinely feel there's not really anything more that we could have done. I'm sure, you know, when the dust settles at the end of this process, I will look back and think about the lessons learned. But at this point in time, I have absolute confidence that both the officer team and the councillors involved, and with support through our supply and confidence agreement with Councillor Mackenzie as well, that we've genuinely done our best. Thank you.
I'll open up questions to the Scrutiny Committee, please. Councillor Freeman.
I have to echo Councillor Robinson's remarks about the amount of work and degree of professionalism shown by the planning team. 923 pages of evidence plus the rest. There's been a level of research, of consultation, which I've rarely seen. However, the clock is running, and we were advised by our Chief Planning Officer that we've got to get through this process before the end of the year. Now, she mentioned unfettered development. If we don't have a new local plan that's fit for purpose, what are the potential consequences of that?
And I don't want this to come across as sort of hysteria, but you know, it has significant consequences for the borough, because it means that we are already seeing in places like Clifton upon Dunsmore applications coming in for housing development without an up-to-date plan and without a 5-year housing land supply. What's called the tilted balance is engaged in the National Planning Policy Framework, which means that we have to be able to say that there are significant and demonstrable reasons that outweigh the benefits of providing housing. I've been in this situation many times at a previous authority where they didn't have an up-to-date local plan and they didn't have a 5-year housing land supply, and it's very difficult to put forward the landscape harm against the national need for housing, and therefore a lot of those applications are allowed on appeal. That means that development is done to, rather than us as a council and the residents as a whole having control over where that development goes. It sometimes comes forward without the necessary infrastructure to support it. It doesn't come forward in a planned and cohesive way. And it's also quite costly as well, because every time we defend one of those appeals, we need to hire barristers, expert witnesses, and if we are considered to be unreasonable in our behaviour in refusing planning permission, we also have to pay the other side's costs. And I think something else that I would kind of make the point of is there's quite a few things in this local plan that we don't currently have and that we really would like to have. So policies on HMOs, which we've got Article 4 directives, but they can't bite in terms of accumulative policies because we need a policy basis for doing that. The landscape sensitivity areas we've identified in the Rainsbrook Valley, they don't bite unless we've got a local plan. So effectively it is non-green belt land that is immediately adjacent to the urban edge. So there'll be significant areas around Clifton upon Dunsmore, particularly in Hillmorton and Dunchurch, which will come under significant pressure, along with villages that where under the new definition are now grey belt rather than green belt. So I don't think that I can underestimate the significance of the harm and the impact. And I refer back to what I said previously. We won't have the opportunity to quickly get another plan in. We've got effectively this one opportunity because of local government reorganisation. As I said to Scrutiny when I came back in September, that it could be almost a decade until Rugby has an up-to-date plan. And that is a significant amount of time to be at the mercy of the development industry. Neil, do you have anything to add to that?
Hello. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Neil Holly. I'm the Development Strategy Manager. Not a great deal to add. I would say that the risk in our borough arises not just in relation to unplanned residential development, but also significantly in relation to employment development, and employment development in areas where, based on the strategic transport assessment evidence, we haven't decided to go because of their impacts on the highway network. And the other thing that I would kind of highlight, just to illustrate the pressures that we will come under, is that there's a non-determination appeal now on land south of Clifton upon Dunsmore. I found out today, and it's in my diary, that we will be doing that on the 28th of April. In appeals like that, the further the plan gets advanced, the more weight we can give it, and a greater our ability to resist developments that are not within the plan or on sites that aren't favoured by the council, and often by not favoured by local communities. If we don't advance a plan, then our ability to resist those will be much less, and ultimately development will still happen. It will just happen in a more ad hoc, less coordinated way. It was interestingly also a point that the strategic transport assessment raised which is that if we can deliver plan-led development, then we can secure the contributions. Then we've modelled the impact of that, and we, as a whole, rather than just ad hoc modelling each individual site, and we can secure a coordinated contributions to a package of transport measures, including the local cycle walking infrastructure plan of Warwickshire County Council and bus service improvement plan, and the specific highways improvements identified in the strategic transport assessment. If we don't have a plan, then it goes out the window, our ability to coordinate in that way. It just becomes every man for himself, and the site's trying to mitigate their own impact rather than looking at the whole picture. So yeah, that's all I would add, really.
Councillor Picker and then Councillor Mc.
Thank you. So I'm going to preface this by saying, obviously, as I think most people know, I was the portfolio holder under the previous administration. I think I even tried to get a jump start on this process because I was conscious at the time of the clock, which is where I'm going to come to now. So we've had very eloquently laid out the possible consequences of not having a plan, and for the record, not only do I believe that we do need a plan, I do fully accept and acknowledge that what we have before us now is manifestly better than what we had nearly a year ago now, 9 months. And indeed, it incorporates a lot of things that were said during the council meeting or at Reg 18 stage. But I'd just like to play it back the other way, because I think the implication from the Chief Officer and from Neil was, we have one shot. There is no more time. There are manifest other things weighed against us, local government reorganisation, MPPF changes, everything else. So essentially, is it that we essentially have this plan with no amendments, no alterations, no changes to site allocations, or nothing?
The risks that I've set out means that is my professional view. I cannot be 100% certain of all of those different things, but my view is that the timescales are such and the risks are such that I need to advise members to put you in the best possible position to have a plan.
Mackenzie.
Thank you. I wanted to follow on from what Mr. Holly had said about the Reg 19, and I just understand at what point the Reg 19 actually starts to take a weighted position within planning, because there is that appeal on the 28th of April, and there are other planning applications that have gone in and all the rest of it. So perhaps you could explain to us about, is it when we published it for Cabinet? Is it when it goes out to consultation? Is it when it's submitted to the inspector? At what point does that actually become live in the process, please?
So what the MPPF says is that we can give it emerging plans, and I'm paraphrasing, we can give them weight according to their stage of preparation and the extent of unresolved objections. So during the Reg 19 consultation, we can start to give some weight to the plan. Only at the point of submission for examination can we start to give it significant or substantial weight in decisions. So the point of submission for examination is critical, and that's also the point at which we could start to raise what and have good prospects of defending what are called predetermination arguments in national policy, which is an argument that if you were to consent this development that is not in the plan, you'd be predetermining decisions that should be made through the plan, because this is at odds with the spatial strategy of the plan. So I think submission is the important point, but the general principle is that the further advanced it is, the greater weight it can carry in decision making.
So, in a follow-up question then, Council is going to make a decision, well, depending on what happens with scrutiny, but assuming it carries on to Council, it's going to make a decision on the 27th. We then run the consultation starting on the 30th. Can you get it in to the examiner before the 28th of April?
We will do our level best to put it in as quickly as we possibly can. I can't make an undertaking that we can do that, because we'll have, for it to be a genuine consultation, we have to reflect on the comments that we receive in the consultation. We have to advise members on those comments and see if any of them require any changes of heart, or whether we would need to. And sometimes what councils do is, when they submit a plan, they submit with it a schedule of modifications that they would invite the inspector to make. We can no longer amend the plan without repeating the consultation, but we could invite the inspector to do so. But we have quite a small team, but it's a team that we put together and is pretty dedicated, and we will move heaven and earth to get the plan submitted as quickly as we can, but making sure that we are actually reading, summarising, and deciding how we would respond to the comments that we receive. And so it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question, because we don't know how many responses we're going to get. We don't know what new issues could be brought to light that we would need to think about and decide whether we're going to respond to. But we will certainly be doing our best to get the plan submitted, not just because of its relevance to the forthcoming appeal, and there may be other sites that it might be relevant to, but also because the planning inspector emailed me last week advising that there's going to be unprecedented demand for submitting local plans in 2026. They therefore advise, because of this cut-off point at the end of the year, they therefore advise any authorities wanting to submit a plan this year to do so as soon as possible to improve their chances of getting an expeditious examination. And bearing in mind that we're trying to not just get a plan submitted, we're trying to get an examination through so we can adopt the plan and start giving it full weight and have 15 years to run. So we understand the pressure we're under, and we're going to try and push it forward as quickly as we can.
Yeah, Louise.
So yeah, just to come back on this, the questioning, and to just kind of take a bit of a pragmatic view on this as well, that fundamentally people don't want development near them. And so there has to come a point at which a council makes a decision on, this is the plan that we're going to put before an inspector. Now, we've heard representations about, from speakers about taking homes away, but we've not heard any representations about where homes could be moved to from the opposition through this process. So we have exhausted our process to the point that we're now confident that this is the best plan that we can put forward. Acknowledging that it will face consultation, it will face further scrutiny, not for us to change, but for an inspector to change. But I would just argue that considering weighing up, a few sites that you might want to change or amend and kicking that can down the road, acknowledging it will open up more objection. We will never get there. I suppose fundamentally what I'm saying is no plan is going to be perfect. Not everybody in the borough is going to be happy with the plan when it goes to the inspector. It's sort of the kind of point of the process. So, yeah, that's all I would add to that.
Thank you. I have Councillor Garcia, then Freeman, and then I think Parker on my list.
Councillor Garcia is ceding to me for rebuttal to what's just been said. Well, first of all, I have much greater faith in the people of Rugby than has been evidenced tonight by the contempt that they've been shown. They're not all NIMBYs. To make a sweeping statement that they just don't want development because they don't want building near them is wrong categorically. I'm going to move on to 2 points. I've just had a text from a constituent who lives in, not a constituent of mine, Coton Park East, about that particular issue that was raised about access to the site. Planning application R250210 is currently live on the planning portal.
We can't talk about actual applications.
Okay, well, there is an application ready and submitted for access to the site. So perhaps we can, perhaps I can get the answer I require after the meeting. As a courtesy. Thank you. After all, we're here to scrutinise, but every time I seem to open my mouth, I'm not allowed to scrutinise anything. Can we just clarify how many units there were at Rounds Gardens in comparison to how many are being proposed? And just to let me say, in the interests of fairness, I do welcome that that site is now in the plan. So I'm not being churlish or argumentative. I just don't recall how many units we had and how many units are now proposed. Thank you.
Can I just clarify, in terms of the Rounds Gardens site question, are you referring to the site area that is in the ownership of Rugby Borough Council?
Yes.
So at the preferred options stage at Regulation 18, there was no number attributed to that site, although those who attended the public consultation events will note that I think Nicola was at pains to stress that we were intending to attribute a number to that site, and that was subject to work that was being undertaken by the Housing Department in order to establish a capacity for that site and consultation that they were going to undertake. The number for it now is 70 units in the proposed submission plan.
Yeah, just to clarify, all I wanted to know was how many was before it was knocked down. But I perhaps didn't phrase my question correctly. How many units did we have on that site before it was knocked down? But listen, happy to take a written response. Okay, I'm not meaning to be argumentative. I'm really not. It was just a question. Thank you.
Councillor Freeman.
Sorry, I said it.
I'm sorry.
Councillor Freeman and then Councillor Garcia.
I'm very grateful to Neil Holly, who's been in part of this process for a long time. I met him long before I became a councillor when we were at the first stage of this planning, and he came across as completely professional. He answered a lot of my awkward questions, and he's continued to do so, as have all the planning officers I've dealt with. Assuming that we don't let the clock run down, we get this local plan out for consultation in time, and we get into the inspector in time, I think from what you said, it doesn't mean that this current draft is completely frozen, because the paper says that minor amendments can be delegated to the Chief Officer. And I think if I understood what Mr. Holly was saying about the inspector, if something comes up of significance, new evidence or so on, that would affect the soundness of the plan, we can invite the inspector to make a determination. Is that correct?
So you're correct on both points, that the Chief Officer has delegated authority to make minor amendments, and an inspector can propose both what are called main modifications. Those are significant modifications to the plan that are required to correct issues of soundness or legal compliance. In relation to main modifications, they would then need to be subject to a further public consultation but that would be held as part of the examination process. And the inspector can also suggest additional modifications which do not go to issues of soundness but are edits essentially. And it would be very unusual to the point of unheard of for a plan to pass through examination without attracting some additional modifications. At least a lot of them attract main modifications as well. So it's by no means that this is totally frozen at the point at which the consultation starts, but the then further amendments are really out of our hands. They're at the discretion of the inspector or inspectors who are conducting the examination.
One follow-on, please.
Just one. Oh, well. I suppose this is one for Councillor Robinson. Could you perhaps explain further why perfection could be the enemy of good in this process? I'm sorry, I'm not very good with microphones. Well, one of the issues that I have had with this whole process is there's constant commentary on it, both online and so on, and that we're constantly in a position where someone says, well, it's okay, but if only you did this and this and this, it'd be perfect. And then someone else will say, well, if you do that, it won't be perfect. Is perfection the enemy of good in this circumstance? Would it be prudent for us, and would it be in the interests of the council taxpayers if we allowed the clock to run down to try and accommodate that sort of behaviour?
Absolutely, yeah. I think we are at that point, and that's kind of what I'm trying to underline here, is that we've been through a robust process. We have clearly listened to the evidence, we've listened to the consultation, we've made amendments. It's never going to be perfect, and I didn't call anybody any names, so thank you for asking the question again, because it gives me an opportunity to correct the record. I didn't call anybody any names. I don't think it's controversial to suggest that people don't generally like development near them. And I don't judge people for it. I understand it completely. But we do have to make those decisions. We have to make those decisions in the best way we possibly can. And then we have to weigh the risks and benefits of either not making those decisions and kicking the can down the road. And yeah, precisely, perfectionism could very much undermine us. It's perfectionism on this issue really is procrastination. So yeah, I think, do I answer your question? I think that's...
I think you did. I think to sum up what you're saying, it's fish or cut bait, isn't it? It's fish or cut bait. Oh, it means just get on with it. Yeah, just do it. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Garcia and then Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Garcia.
Thank you so much. I want to refer back to the fact that you keep saying that you've made all sound decisions. When I look at Brinklow particularly, it does have 425 houses now, over 2.5 miles, but the local plan is wanting to change that completely and put in a massive expansion. And the basis that you've done that on is the fact of the school that we heard earlier. And the fact really is that you've got that wrong, and there is only a reception class. So it's 3.5 miles to the school in Monks Kirby. The school in Monks Kirby is very large and causes a lot of problems to the residents in Monks Kirby with the normal traffic and parking. It's 6 miles to the nearest secondary school. The only way that children could walk legitimately to Monks Kirby is down a main road without any pavements or without lighting. There's also sewer overflows continually in Brinklow that flood homes and pollute playing fields. It has 26 listed buildings and a monument with the same legal protection as Stonehenge. How can you possibly justify that this was a sound decision to double the housing in Brinklow?
It's perhaps, it falls to me to respond to this. There were a number of points there. I'm probably not going to respond to all of them. In relation to the school, which is a point that's been raised on a couple of occasions tonight. I think the reference to an error in relation to the school was a reference to the interim sustainability appraisal report authored by ACOM, which was published as part of the preferred options consultation in March. To reassure members that we as officers were not working under the misapprehension that there is a full all forms of entry primary school in Brinklow, and nor are the SA consultants who have corrected that and recognised it in the final sustainability appraisal report, which is Appendix 3 to the Cabinet report. There are a number of comments you make about heritage impact, which is an issue that we were very aware of and have consequently commissioned independent consultants to assess the heritage impact of site options, and we are satisfied that the sites can be developed, the sites that are in the proposed submission plan can be developed without causing significant harm to heritage assets, and indeed one of the changes that is proposed in relation to Brinklow in comparison to the preferred option is a reduction in the capacity of the site south of Brinklow, and one of the principal reasons for that is in recognition of the heritage constraints on part of that site in the form of an undesignated heritage asset, which is Ridge and Furrow. In relation to a point you raise about sewer capacity, this is something that we internally do not have expertise in. We are reliant on external consultants who we commission to produce a level 2 water cycle study, and they in turn are reliant on information provided by Severn Trent Water as the water company and the Environment Agency. The overall conclusions, I mean, this is not me saying that there are not issues in relation to particularly wastewater treatment in the borough. There clearly are. It's not within the gift of this borough to solve those, this council to solve those issues. What we have to assess is whether they should be a constraint to development and stop development in a particular location, and the findings of the water cycle study would not support that as a reason to have no development in Brinklow or indeed any of the other locations where the proposed submission local plan proposes development. So I mean, that's, unless there are any other of the specific points you wanted me to come back on. I suppose the overarching point of why Brinklow is under our current adopted local plan, identified as one of the main rural settlements on the basis of the level, that was a judgment made on the basis of a rural sustainability study undertaken for the purposes of preparation of the current local plan. We updated that, and the conclusions of it is that Brinklow remains one of our better served rural settlements, and therefore when you look outside of the town of Rugby, it's that tier of settlements where we would look for additional housing sites. And then we went through, as you can probably see from the published evidence, a detailed process of assessing individual sites and assessing at settlement level, and we have reached a recommendation that the sites put forward at Brinklow are some of the better sites. Obviously there are people who will disagree with that, and that is entirely part of the planning process, and they are very welcome to submit their responses through the consultation, and they will be considered by the planning inspector. But hopefully that just provides a little bit of insight into how we've considered constraints and why we have made recommendations that we have.
Could I just ask a follow-on question to that? Do you know how many children, or have you a rough estimate of how many children those houses are going to bring? And have you done any assessment on the impact on Monks Kirby, on the school there and the surrounding area of Monks Kirby, actually?
Yes and yes. I don't know the number off of the top of my head. It is a so in order to, so this was one of the big advantages to us in commissioning our own education modelling, and we're grateful to colleagues in the local education authority at Warwickshire County Council in allowing us access to that information and checking our assumptions and really working with us so that we could produce our own modelling. And that has enabled us to produce a model that takes into account both the existing school populations, because we've got the school census information. It takes into account the latest population projections and population structures so that we can kind of anticipate what as the cohorts move through the school system, we can anticipate how many children they're going to be who are not currently in schools. And we can also apply into that a trajectory for the sites that are both sites with planning permission that we know about already and sites that are in this proposed submission plan. And in working out how many children should go into the model from those additional houses that are planned through the plan, we have applied the what I think is often called the pupil generation or pupil product ratios for Warwickshire, which are published by government and used by Warwickshire County Council in education planning. And you can read about the outcomes of that model in the education topic paper, which is published as part of the evidence base. Suffice to say that there are details in there of projected future population of future numbers of students at the Revel School and a discussion of that. But it's I don't have the details of those numbers to hand so that I can read them out now. But I met. I'm very open to, because I understand this is quite a technical area, and I met with Councillor at his request with Councillor Karadia earlier this week to take him through the modelling. I'd be very happy to do that with any other councillors who want to try and get into this. I'm not an expert in education modelling. I can only share my understanding of what the consultants who we've paid to do that, what they've done. But I suppose that's a long way of saying that we have very carefully considered that and tried to use the best data to assess the number of students that would be generated and how that would affect projected capacity at the affected schools.
Well, I thank you for that quite long-winded answer when I really just wanted a number. But if you can give me a number, that would be great. And maybe just a little synopsis of how it was worked out would be fantastic and able to for me to understand it moving forward.
I absolutely can. I'd have to take that offline. As you can appreciate, there are quite a lot of numbers connected with this local plan, and I don't hold all of them in my head. So,
Councillor Mackenzie and then Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. First of all, I want to do a slight aside to Councillor Garcia, just to invite you to both support my motion on sewage and potentially invite you to put in an amendment to add in the issues around Brinklow. I'd like to turn to the Rainsbrook Valley, please. It's a policy I very much welcome. I know it's a very special place to many of us, and I'd like to just pick up on that policy because it's something new. It's obviously not something there was no protection in the previous local plan. There's an awful lot of interest from residents around the Rainsbrook Valley. Can you just explain how much weight, if we can get that policy through, how much weight that will actually hold in terms of holding off development in the Rainsbrook Valley?
If your question is how much weight it would have when the plan is adopted, then the answer is full weight. And in determining planning applications, national policy states that they should be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So it becomes the starting point for decisions, essentially. It doesn't become, because of our discretionary planning system, it doesn't become, as no planning policy is, a kind of totally irrebuttable policy, because decision makers always have to take into account other material considerations, but it will become as good as you can get, really, in terms of the weight that can be given to the policy.
So Freeman, then Councillor Picker, and if anybody else wants to talk, please indicate now, okay? Councillor Freeman.
Right, I hope I can be heard. There's just a follow-up on Councillor Garcia's question about schools. Unless I've misunderstood, schools and places planning and school transport, these are things that are dealt with by the current county council, who also manage planning applications for school sites. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
So Picker.
So I think we are sort of drawing to a bit of a natural conclusion. I do just want to put something on record that keeps on seeming to get brought up, that there was absolutely no protection whatsoever afforded to the Rangebrook Valley under previous local plans. It was identified as a green and blue infrastructure corridor. It did have a landscape sensitivity study. It was protected, and I've got the planning appeal judgments to prove it. However, just drawing to a close where we are, because I think we have, if you'll forgive the terrible pun, been around the houses a bit. I want to ask as someone who, thank you. I want to ask as someone who is actually new to this committee in my nearly 8 years at this council. I don't think I've ever sat on this particular committee before, but I just want some guidance from the chair and the legal officer as to what exactly it is we're in a position to do at this stage, because we've heard quite conclusively that it is kind of this or bust. So having had the very interesting and engaging and informative conversation that I think has opened up a few avenues of discussion, what do we do now?
If I can answer, and then I can be corrected when I get it wrong. We can always go in, decide that we're going to actually put this back to Cabinet, okay? I can imagine nobody in our mind here in this committee is thinking that way. That is an option, right? We can make recommendations. Those recommendations are probably just to consider what has been discussed in this meeting and what's been spoken about. We could set up there's already a working group, okay? So really, we could do absolutely nothing, okay? So really those are, so I think you're steering to a certain direction there, if that answers you. Oh, okay. I'm going to ask some questions if I can. So, as chair, just one. This has been to scrutiny before this subject. There were some questions asked. I haven't actually received the answers, I don't believe. One was around the policy around grey belt and the percentage of the local plan grey belt. I'm quite happy to take a written answer on that. Okay. One I just want to test really is, and it's the final test I hope, is could you go back to a landlord and that landlord change an opinion and still be able to get the local plan through? You have some land there as landowner.
So
Sorry,
it's an interesting.
I can't remember what I said there.
It's an interesting point about landowners. So just to clarify first, where did we source the potential candidate sites from? And the answer to that is a call for sites that was undertaken as part of the issues and options consultation in 2023. Those sites went into a housing and economic land availability assessment process. They then went to a stage 2 site assessment and then the preferred options regulation 18 consultation earlier this year. We would hope that any landowner who wanted to withdraw their site from the process would have notified us at one of those previous, I mean, this is not the first time this is in the public domain, at those previous stages over the past 2 years. If it were to come to light that a landowner was genuinely making their land unavailable, then, which is an unusual state of affairs, and a lot of the sites that we are putting forward in the proposed submission plan are now professionally promoted, even if, or they were from the start, even if they weren't, they often now are. By that I mean there's a promotion agreement or an option agreement in place with the developer or a land promoter. In the, I suppose, hopefully unlikely event that a landowner were to put forward a representation to the inspector stating that their land is no longer available for development, then that would be a significant issue for the developer, whether that site meets the tests to be a developable site in the plan, and it would then be an examination issue and potentially something that would trigger an inspector requiring modifications to the plan. I mean, obviously landowners are the masters of their own destiny. There's nothing that we can do to force them to continue to make their land available for development. This is gone are the days where councils basically acquired, in probably the 1950s, where councils would acquire most land that was going to be developed in local plans. Ultimately, this is a regulatory plan, and land is brought forward by landowners and private developers. And so those transactions and the land ownership angle of it we cannot control. And so there is always an element of risk in that, both in relation to the plan process and then in relation to the delivery of sites later. But all I can say is that we've done our best to, and we've followed the appropriate and correct process to try and identify which sites are available and only put forward sites that we consider to be available and available for the use for which they are allocated. If it transpires that there have been changes of heart from landowners, then we will do our best as officers to mitigate that and look for a solution through the examination process. And that's all I can really say.
Councillor Robinson, a question for you. It's more about the process now. The process is always going to be difficult, but there must be learning that comes through this process. So we've had a number of statements made tonight, you know, people saying there's procedural failures, evidence-based issues, unsustainable infrastructure. I think the last one, just the removal process of things. So I just wonder whether I would propose to you, and just the question of whether we should try and do a lessons learned exercise of some sort, what the learning is of this process, and maybe how we could improve the last stages of the process.
Thank you for the question, Chair. And yeah, I'm always up for that. I mean, lessons learned is really important. While I have absolute confidence in the process that we've gone through, and I said that earlier, I did mention that phrase myself about lessons learned, and I think it is important to do that. So yeah, I welcome that.
The final one I have, and it might be more to yourself, Nicola, is about, is there a process point when we should bring this back to scrutiny? Is there something sensible come back to scrutiny?
Oh, I'm thinking about that. I think we could make scrutiny, we could report back to scrutiny on, for instance, the outcome of the consultation, but it's not part of a process in terms of it needs to come to scrutiny before we submit it for examination. And I'm quite happy to take that away in terms of any other input that scrutiny can have, but quite happy as a method of keeping you informed and updated as we move through this process. And certainly also maybe if members wanted further guidance of when it says examination, what that looks like, how they can get involved, all those sorts of things.
Appreciate that, and we'll take that away in terms of working out when. So, Ramesh, please, you haven't asked a question, you can ask.
Last question. Is plan deliverable within the plan, over the plan period? Can it be delivered?
Well, ultimately, that's a question for the inspector. We have to put forward a plan that we think is sound. One of the tests of soundness is the plan effective? Will it be deliverable? And we have been that is one of the considerations that we have had foremost in our mind, because it will be a line of challenge that those objecting to the plan, principally those promoting emission sites and objecting to the plan, of which there are many, will level against us. And indeed, that is the consideration that has informed the stance that we have taken on Coton Park East and South West Rugby, as Nicola explained earlier. So we wouldn't be putting forward to a plan to you that we thought was not deliverable. So we think it is, but ultimately that will be tested in lots of detail through the examination process, and we'll see where we get to.
Anybody who hasn't talked can talk, yes.
Absolutely. It was just, you've just sort of answered the question, just making sure that it's fully compliant with MPFF. The plan that you've got now, you're happy?
Which is another of the soundness tests in terms of consistency with national policy. Yes. The only caveat I would raise on that is that, as some of you may be aware, the government has launched just before Christmas a consultation on a new MPPF, which is in contrast to previous updates to the MPPF. And the MPPF has existed since 2012. It's been through updates in 2018 and 2023 and 2024. Those were not fundamental changes to the structure of national policy. They were nonetheless important changes, but they didn't really rewrite the whole thing. There were tweaks. What is now subject to consultation is a rewriting of the whole thing. Our plan will not, assuming that there's a consultation by government, assuming the new MPPF, and they may change it, but when the new MPPF is brought into effect, it won't apply to our plan. Our plan will be under the transitional provisions examined under the current version of the MPPF, and that's what they say in their consultation. But there are some parts of the new national policy that government intends to would have immediate effect. And one of the things that we will need to look at very carefully, and my colleagues are looking at, is a comparison between what is in the proposed submission plan and what is in the consultation version of the new MPPF, to see where there might be differences between our plan and there was no way we could have mitigated that, because we didn't have a crystal ball to work out what the government would consult on. I think they launched the consultation just before Christmas, so after the cabinet papers were published. But we will do a comparison, because that will determine the risk that the plan will be overridden by new national policy when that policy comes into effect. But as far as the policy that the plan was prepared under, we think we've produced a plan that is consistent with national policy. Of course, again, this is a favoured line of attack for developers, and there will be people undoubtedly, and indeed other respondents to the consultation, who will fairly point to national policy and argue that the plan is not consistent with particular paragraphs, and those will be considered by the inspector, and the council will put a view, and ultimately the inspector will reach a judgment. But insofar as we as officers are advising you, we think we're putting forward a plan that is consistent with national policy.
If I could just add to that, Chair, just one brief sentence. For anyone who's been in planning any amount of time, and I'm also looking at Mr Davis here, you will know that they are constantly changing planning policy and introducing new regulations. And so actually there's not a good time to do a plan. You can't wait until all those changes have been made, and then you've got a period of time before the next ones come in. And so all we can do is work through the process on the basis of what we know.
This is the last question. Councillor Sioni, do you want to ask a question? No? Okay.
Thank
last
you,
question from yourself.
We have talked about the unitary authorities, which might happen, might not. Yes. If it happens, how our new plan adopted will be affected?
If our plan is adopted prior to going into local government reorganisation, it becomes a saved plan. So you can see this in places like Buckinghamshire, which has gone through reorganisation, and also in Northamptonshire. In those areas, the adopted plan remains the plan in which to determine planning applications if the application site is in the former borough of Rugby Borough Council. And so it would be saved until a date that the new unitary authority determines that it will do its local plan for the entirety of the new local area. And I think probably a point that I probably should have made earlier is that within Warwickshire, and obviously we don't know at this stage whether it's going to be 1 or 2 unitaries, Nuneaton and Bedworth have a up-to-date adopted local plan, and Stratford and Warwick are on a very similar trajectory to us to get their plan through in 2026. So going into a new unitary authority, whether it's 1 or 2, we don't want to be the one place that doesn't have an up-to-date plan, because they are very costly, they are very time-consuming, they are very political by their nature, and a new unitary authority will probably have quite a lot of other things that it needs to get to grips with, and a new local plan process is probably not going to be a top priority, and therefore it is really important, in my view, that we have a saved plan for Rugby.
Okay, I think that concludes the debate. I don't think we are looking to do anything, as we've discussed, in terms of trying to put something back to Cabinet. I think there's a couple of written statements that have been, but I'm sure the minutes will reflect that. There is consideration of bringing it back to scrutiny. That might line up with the lessons learned piece. We'll try and make that timing work. I think what we're asking the portfolio holder is just to listen to what was discussed tonight. It's just recommendations, general recommendations from it. We have a council meeting tomorrow, which is obviously the appropriate, next week, which is obviously the appropriate time for all. It feels like next day already. Next week, which seems to be the appropriate time for any amendments or anything to be discussed at that time. So there is opportunity for those. And is there anything anybody wants to add from the Scrutiny Committee?
As long as I can get my answers.
Absolutely. And you're going to put those in writing, is that? I would have just done it, but I've run out of battery. Okay, right. Okay. Okay, no problem at all. So, okay, so I believe that concludes the business of the meeting. I'd like to thank the portfolio holders and the officers for attending. I'd like to thank the speakers. It is a pleasure to have speakers at the Scrutiny Committee. Okay, okay. Thank you.